All right, I'd like to call to order the December 11th, 2023 Mountlake Terrace Planning Commission meeting to order. Would you please take the roll?
Not council member, planning commissioner, Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Harrison.
Here.
Commissioner Landis.
Here.
Commissioner Stenson.
Here.
And what is your title? Commissioner Batista, but
Chair.
not
That's all right.
mayor. Okay.
I'm here, and then I believe we have an online participant.
Yes, Adam Betcher.
All right, and then let the record show that Commissioner Thompson stated at the last meeting that she'll be arriving late because she is at a training over at the police department right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is the approval of the November 27th, 2023 minutes. Does anybody have any changes or corrections to those? I am not hearing or seeing anything, and I don't see any indication online, so we'll go ahead and declare those accepted as presented. Item number 4, public comment. Does anybody have any public comment tonight for anything that is not on the agenda tonight? I am seeing no indication for in-person public comment, and then we'll wait till see if there's anybody online who wishes to make public comment for anything that's not on the agenda.
No one signed up in person, and if there's anyone in the online audience who would like to make a comment, please use the hand raise tool. Going once, going twice. There are no public comments online.
All right, moving on. Item number 5, public hearing for zoning text amendment for private recreation facilities, MTMC 19.15.190, 19.23, 19.30, and 19.135.060.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Pizzo. I'm an associate planner here, and I'm back for the public hearing on the zoning text amendment. So tonight I'll be going over some background information, going over the proposal that was submitted, and then discussing the SEPA, Department of Commerce, and written public comments that have been received since we last met. Then going over how the comprehensive plan, zoning, and land use relates to this proposal, and then providing staff analysis, staff recommendation, supported by findings of fact and conclusions of law. All right, so some background information. Zoning text amendments, as you know, are a change to the zoning code. They are not site or project specific, and they can be changed at any time as long as the change is consistent with the comprehensive plan. This is a legislative decision, so tonight is the open record hearing, and Planning Commission will be tasked with making a recommendation to City Council, who will ultimately be the decision-making authority. So an overview of the process: we received a text amendment proposal in the summer from Forest Crest Athletic Club. That proposal was submitted to the Department of Commerce for the 60-day review, which actually just ended December 4th. We held 2 Planning Commission work sessions, November 13th and November 27th. And then tonight is the public hearing and recommendation to City Council. All right, so the proposal, as I said, we received an application from Forest Crest Athletic Club. They are a non-conforming use and have non-conforming structures and improvements on their site. And they are proposing to allow privately owned recreation facilities in single household residential zones, given specific criteria is met with regard to location, dimensions, landscaping, parking. Although their site would be potentially affected by this text amendment, or would be as it's proposed, this is not a site-specific application and does have broader implications for the city as a whole. And their proposal includes changes to the following code sections listed there. So our definitions, our land use, our single household residential district dimensional requirements, special regulations, and sign regulations. All right, so if the amendment proposed was approved, there are 4 properties in the city of Mountlake Terrace that would be eligible essentially to apply for a critical area or considered for a critical area, a conditional use permit. And so these are the 4 properties here. Some of them do contain a critical area or have other site constraints. So really it's 2 properties if this were to be approved as proposed. However, if single-family resident lots were consolidated, these are the properties kind of hashed that would be able to be considered for a conditional use permit for private recreation facilities. Okay, moving on to the environmental review, Department of Commerce and public comment information. So the environmental review resulted in a determination of non-significance. This was issued October 27th this year. No agency or public comments were received on the environmental checklist. Department of Commerce review, we also did not receive any comments. And as I stated earlier, this comment period ended last week. Since we have last been before the Planning Commission, staff has received, I believe, 29 public comments, written comments on the application, all in support of the zoning text amendment. Some themes that staff has pulled out from the letters is that the writers really want to see the Forest Crest Athletic Club be able to make needed improvements to the facilities, specifically calling out rebuilding the clubhouse, modernizing facilities, expanding availability of indoor courts, and improving both indoor and outdoor courts. The letters state that Forest Crest Athletic Club is a beneficial amenity to the city of Mountlake Terrace and surrounding communities. All right, so the comprehensive plan, zoning, and land use information related to this proposal. So the comprehensive plan states that the city should provide fun and diverse recreational opportunities that support health, wellness, and engagement of all community members. We want to encourage business investment and retention. The primary land use in urban low residential classification is single-family residential land uses. We need to increase housing opportunities to meet population growth projections, and we need to encourage new development to be compatible with surrounding neighborhoods. Our zoning code says that single household zoning districts are intended to provide land for single household residential uses and complementary uses. Complementary uses are not specifically defined, but generally are not commercial in nature, or the commercial use is very limited. And there are actually 7 zoning districts in Mountlake Terrace that currently allow for private recreation facilities. And you can see those on our zoning map here. So the starred zones, the blue, red, gray, green, pink, and purple areas on the map. And then our recreation, parks, and open space plan has some key themes that relate to this proposal. So our current recreation facilities are aging. They're heavily used by local residents and regional visitors. Demand for recreational opportunities is increasing with population growth. We need more outdoor facilities, specifically calling out tennis and basketball courts, as well as indoor facilities like pools, gyms, fitness studios. An implementation action that's specifically called out in the plan is partnering with other organizations like local businesses. And lastly, the plan states that amenities should be equitably distributed across the city. So now I'll go into the staff analysis. So staff was looking at Municipal Code 1805310A, which is the criteria that relates to zoning text amendments. And it says that the zoning text may be changed at any time as long as the change is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So when looking at comprehensive plan consistency, there were some things that strongly supported the proposal and others that did not. So the goals and policies related to economic development and promoting recreation opportunities did appear to support the text amendment. Housing and land use goals, however, could be more challenging to fulfill if the proposal is passed. But if housing goals can be met while allowing private recreation facilities in our single household zones, there could be a path forward for allowing private recreation facilities in these areas as a non-primary complementary use. And staff believes that allowing them by conditional use permit as proposed by the applicant would be the appropriate way to permit these in these zones in alignment with that complementary use language. And then the main concern staff has with the proposal is really ensuring that development is compatible with surrounding neighborhoods. We want to make sure we mitigate adverse impacts to residential properties, not only through the conditional use permit process, but also through code. Right, so now I'm going to go through the criteria proposed by the applicant and which criteria staff supported and which staff opposed or recommends changing. So in terms of what's supported, the applicant proposed impervious surface maximums. Staff feels that may be beneficial. We would need to do further research to provide a final determination on that, as well as a percentage of what impervious surface maximum should be. Staff agreed that a minimum of 1 loading space should be required, but believes it should be specified to be off-street loading. Staff agreed that parking on the same lot as the building or facility was good, and that public parking should not count towards parking requirements. Staff also is in alignment with the interior lot landscaping requirement of 10 feet in width, type 5 abutting RS zones, and type 3 abutting rec zones. Type 5 is a stronger screening, and type 3 is a little bit less strong, but separates different uses. And then landscaping, electrical vehicle charging, and bicycle parking should all be considered and required, but a lot of the proposal with regards to these concerns was redundant with existing code requirements and staff felt was unnecessary. And then I want to note that on this slide, as well as the next several slides, the green asterisk means that a hearing examiner could impose a different requirement based on specific project and context during conditional use permit review. But staff feels like these are good starting points. All right, so moving on to the criteria that was opposed by staff. So the proposal included a requirement to locate next to a public park or recreation facility. Staff felt that this requirement was unnecessary and didn't align with the recreation park and open space plan's goal of distributing amenities equitably. So not that a private rec facility couldn't be located next to these types of uses, but that it wouldn't need to be required. Maximum heights of 5 to 10 feet taller than what's currently allowed in RS zones was proposed. However, staff would recommend that height requirements remain consistent with the current code. Setbacks proposed were consistent or less restrictive than what current code allows, but staff would recommend actually being more restrictive in line with what we require for schools and religious facilities, which is a minimum setback of 20 feet from all property lines. And then the lot coverage that was proposed was 20% higher than what is currently allowed in all RS zones, except it was consistent with RST. And so staff would recommend not allowing a greater lot coverage than what's currently allowed in each zone. The applicant proposed a minimum lot size of 1.5 acres for private recreation facilities in RS zones. And after some discussion with Planning Commission, staff felt that, yes, maximum lot size could be considered instead of a minimum lot size to help decrease the scale of potential recreation facilities and the resulting impacts on residences. And then the proposal included locating a requirement to locate private rec facilities within 500 feet of an arterial. When our city engineer reviewed it, they felt that was inadequate at addressing traffic concerns and recommended requiring them to locate on an arterial to help mitigate traffic impacts. And then just notice that a lot of the proposed code for landscaping only applied it to new private recreation facilities, and staff doesn't recommend this language as it could be confusing with our landscaping code, which requires landscape improvements for all development and redevelopment. So staff would want to be consistent with that. But then any amendments that are specific to landscaping for recreation facilities should be amended through the landscaping code, 19130. All right, so the proposal included a street frontage landscaping requirement, which was consistent with our current code, requiring a minimum of type 1 landscaping, 5 feet in width as a minimum. Staff would recommend adding the street frontage and parking lot perimeter landscaping requirement widths or suggestions. They're suggested widths, and public recreation facilities are called out. And so staff would recommend being consistent with that for private recreation facilities in RS zones. And then the parking requirement proposals, staff deemed insufficient, and also noticed they're very highly specific to certain type of recreational uses. And so staff would recommend leaving the parking requirements to our current code requirements, which may include parking studies and determinations based on nationally accepted standards per project proposal. And then the sign regulations, while mostly decent, did not list a maximum total sign area, and staff would recommend being consistent with what we allow for religious facilities and schools in our RS zones, which is 50 square feet per wall. And then there was additional criteria that was not covered by the proposal, but staff felt was missing that would help to help mitigate impacts to residences and would be applicable regardless of specific neighborhood context or project site. So these are hours of operation, lighting fixture heights and shielding, fencing heights, and transparency. And yeah, these specific code regulations are applicable, we feel, to all RS zones. And although the hearing examiner does have authority through the conditional use process to make determinations that are specific to a project in a context, we feel that having these and the other things we had just discussed in code will help support the hearing examiner review and provide guidance. And so that's beneficial for that process. And then as a reminder, staff looked at comparable cities, specifically Shoreline, Linwood, and Edmonds for their zoning codes and what they allow, if anything comparable. And Shoreline was the only city that allowed sports club uses in single household residential zones, also as a conditional use. There are some general code requirements, but a lot of it is left to director interpretation when their director reviews the conditional use permit. And no sports clubs have actually been built since the incorporation of Shoreline in 1995. There is one pool associated with a homeowners association and another neighborhood pool that has very limited membership that is open to residences onto nearby streets. So a little bit different than what potentially could be built with this zoning text amendment. And so staff recommendation, staff recommends denial of the proposed zoning text amendment based on the following conclusions of law. So private recreation facilities may be a compatible use in RS zones if the criteria for approval adequately mitigates adverse impacts to adjacent and surrounding properties. And as proposed, the criteria to approve private rec facilities in RS zones does not fully address compatibility with adjacent and surrounding residential land uses. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Does Planning Commission have any questions for staff? I am not hearing or seeing anything in person. How about our remote commissioner?
No questions.
All right. So since there's no question from the Planning Commission for staff, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anybody like to make a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion to open the public hearing?
I have a motion to open the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. The public hearing is now open. Ooh, okay. Thank you. And so it looks like at this point, the applicant can make a presentation. Do we have someone who's going to do? Okay, it looks like we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Planning Commissioners. My name is Lee Michaelis. I'm with Puget Sound Planning, address 6100 219th Street Southwest, Suite 480, Mountlake Terrace, 98043. My presentation tonight will really just focus on a response to some of the staff comments that you have just heard from their presentation and why the proposal is not consistent with the comprehensive plan or that the proposed criteria does not adequately address impacts. So the first one I'd like to address is the comment that the proposal should only apply to new public facilities. It was never our intent to mean that this wouldn't apply to the current or existing facilities. We use the term new just because there aren't private recreational facilities in the community now. This is a new term. So we use the word new just because it's new to the code. So that word can be stricken out of any of the code language as needed by the staff. The second was that the staff suggestion of the consolidation of single-family residences to create more opportunities to develop community recreational facilities. It would take about 9 to 10 single-family lots to equate to 1.5 acres, which is what we're proposing. At a low estimate of $500,000 a lot, or $500,000, that's roughly $9 million just an acquisition cost, or $4.5 to $5 million, and then plus just for land acquisition. So we don't think it's realistic or highly likely that any of the single-family lots would consolidate. Therefore, our analysis or our intent was just for the two properties that would resulted, which is the Korean Presbyterian Church and the FCAC site. So as we go through this, our analysis, just think of those two sites in mind, and not really a single family lot, because we don't think that those are likely to consolidate and redevelop. The next one would be the establishment of complementary uses, or how a private recreational facility is complementary or in line with the residential uses. Staff provided some examples over the last couple meetings, which was the police station, a golf course, and then the recycling facility. We don't see these being less intense than FCAC or any other privately owned community facility. And in fact, it already allows public recreational facilities. So once it becomes private, does that mean it becomes more intense? Probably not. So we think that private recreational facilities are a complementary or a supplemental use in the residential zone less even than the police station or the transfer stations that were provided earlier. The last one at a comprehensive plan level was housing goals. Again, the two sites that we are looking at, the Presbyterian Church as well as FCAC, each one, if they were 5 acres, 1 acre, 2 acre, roughly at 7,200 square feet per lot, 9 new homes are going to be built. In their analysis for the comp plan, if they are looking at these two sites to redevelop, then that's about 18 new houses. Over 20 years, is that substantial enough to make a difference? Probably not. But to begin with, those sites shouldn't even be looked at as potential housing because the church is going to be there for years, if not decades. FCAC is going to be there for a while. So those two sites probably shouldn't even be looked at to meet housing goals anyways. So now I want to move on to the locational criteria and some of the things that staff presented on why it doesn't address the impacts. The first one is the locational criteria. We think this is pretty important, and this is key in that a private facility should supplement and complement public facilities. They're in areas that are distributed throughout the city. I don't think that, or we don't believe that this would not provide an equitable distribution. It's an existing use. If the church decided to redevelop, it's next to the existing park, but it's next to a use that's already there. The residents are going to expect the types of impacts, whether it be noise, which could be addressed, whether it be traffic, whether it be lights. These are uses that would be in the area already, so it's not something that would not be expected. So we think that a locational criteria is subject and key to this draft. The 40-foot height maximum. The intent of the 40-foot height maximum was to allow the existing building on FCAC to come into conformance. It's not needed. We are definitely willing to work with staff to bring that maximum height down to the current code regulations. So if the Planning Commission decides that this is something that should move forward to the City Council, we can make that change to have the height be consistent with the current zone. The next one is the setbacks. Staff recommended that the setbacks be consistent with schools and religious facilities. 20 feet would limit the property, limit the redevelopment, but it's not something that should stop the project. Again, if the Planning Commission thinks or decides that this should move forward, we are willing to work with staff to revise the setback requirements before we move on to City Council. A minimum lot size. Again, we find that this is a pretty key component. We think limiting or leaving the minimum lot size in place reduces the amount of potential area and reduces the amount of impacts on neighborhoods throughout Mountlake Terrace. So we think that keeping the minimum lot size in place is a better opportunity or better product in the draft. Located within 500 feet of an arterial. This criteria is pretty important, specifically to FCAC. Without this, FCAC, the whole project just goes away. They're not on a minor, they're not on a collector, they're not on a major arterial. Requiring this would render their project useless. It would just go away, leaving the buildings as they are. No opportunity for maintenance beyond what's allowed by a non-conforming use or structure. So it would severely limit what they do with their site. So we think the 500 feet within a minor arterial is the way to go for this proposal. Landscape requirements, parking code requirements, and sign regulations. Again, these are all things that we feel we can work with staff. I think we can get to where they want us to be. So with Planning Commission recommendation, I think we can make those changes and get to a draft or get to a City Council work session that can make this draft move forward. With that, I think we can address the concerns with those changes. We ask that the Planning Commission vote in favor of moving this amendment forward with the amendments that I mentioned, and that way we can move on to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Planning Commission have any questions for the presenter? Not hearing or seeing any for in-person. How about our online commissioner?
No questions.
All right, thank you. All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and open up for additional public comment. I have the list right here. Is there anybody who who did not sign up on the list?
Chair, the applicant has another representative that
Oh,
would
I'm
like to
sorry.
speak.
Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Tom Anderson with Forest Crest Athletic Club, 4809 238th Street Southwest, Mountlake Terrace. I want to thank you. We've submitted quite a few letters and in support of our project in the last week or two, and I'm hoping that you were able to go through all those. I think she said there was 27, 28. I thought there was a few more than that. And I'm hoping that you were able to go through all those. Most of our members at Forest Crest are pretty passionate about the club and are really looking forward to us being able to do some improvements. And anyway, I wanted to comment on a few things. I submitted some additional information later this afternoon regarding our application. The last commission meeting, the planning staff and their presentation showed some photos of what a new facility would look like adjacent to some single-family homes or a single-family home. And we kind of took issue with the scale of the photo. It kind of showed this large brick building next to a small house. And Sarah, could you show the two photos now, or the first one? I kind of want to show a worst-case scenario. That photo there is the rear of Forest Crest Athletic Club. And that building height there is 40 feet. And it also sits on top of a 5-foot concrete wall there at the back. So that particular building right there is, as it exists, is almost 10 feet taller than what we are proposing in our text amendment application. And so it would be considerably smaller. And the setback of that building is only 10 feet from a property line. And I guess we're proposing 20 feet, Lee, or 20 feet. So that building, in addition, at the location in any future build of a recreational facility, would be 10 feet further back and 10 feet lower. And the reason I wanted to show that photo is because that house on the left, and could you show the next one, please, Sarah? And those three homes on the right there, those are all new homes we constructed in the last few years. The one on the left sold for $1.1 million. The three on the left was 1.2, 1.3, and $1.4 million. And I find that interesting because those people spent that amount of money for a house in Mountlake Terrace and were not concerned with the impact of that building right there. They knew it was a tennis facility, and they are all hoping that in the future that we're able to do some improvements to our club. And secondly, do you have the next picture, please? We did an overhead. That's Forest Crest Athletic Club, and I should have circled the area there. You see the large steel building, and next to it to the left is a storage building, and then right in front of the building is the clubhouse, and then you'll see the two outdoor courts that are the red and the green, and then the back of a house there you see in the dark black is another third tennis court. And that's kind of what, I know we're talking about the text amendment today, but I also want to talk about what, just shortly, the project that we would do if this text amendment goes through. And if you could go to the next photo, please. And so what we want to do is to tear down a couple of rental houses that we own and move that third court that was in the dark around to where you see the three new courts there. And then our pickleball courts get pushed back and we build a nice new clubhouse building for the tennis courts. And you will see that there, the infill of new housing that will be built if we are able to get this text amendment, rearrange our property, move our courts around, and we'll have additional lots that we can build new homes on, which obviously the city wants. And so you'll see 4 homes there that are on 238th. There's some flag lots in the back for a total of 6, and then back on 237th, next to those pickleball courts, will be 2 new homes back there. And this text amendment's important for us to be able to do some of that housing. And we'll be able to do a few of the houses, but rearranging all that property, which we can't do with the current laws, has to be done before we can do that. And so on 237th to the left there, obviously, if we were able to do that project, we're going to end up putting in 200-300 feet of street frontage improvement. And back on 237th, where the 2 new homes are back there, and the moving of the courts, we'll have to do, I think, 120 feet of street frontage improvements back there. But I think if you see, looking at that before photo and the after photo, that it just changes that whole block. And it's just such a huge improvement to that area. And I just think it's important to know what we're trying to do in addition to housing-wise, in addition to I want to make a nice club for both for our members and the community. And additionally, I have been visiting our neighbors, and do you have that sheet attached, or is that the only thing you have? Yeah, right there. There's 2. There's just a page with 1 more. Those are our neighbors. I think there's 13 of them on there. And if you go to the next page, all those people, I have explained to them the text amendment that we're proposing and what we were trying to do after the text amendment passes. And they all approve of it. Those are all people that approve of what we're trying to do. They all live there. They bought some of the houses that we sold. There's some of the people that have lived there for years. And is there one more page you can go to? Maybe right there, you can see in the outline there of Forest Crest Athletic Club property, you see all those round dots there. That's the location of all the people that have signed that sheet that are in favor of our application. I have 2 or 3 more people that are out of town that I know that would sign it. Yep, a couple of people haven't been home, so I haven't been able to catch them. But anyway, so within our little community there, our neighbors are in favor of this text amendment and what we're trying to do. And I guess that's all I have to say. I appreciate you taking a look at it, and that's it.
All right,
Questions?
thank you. Does Commission have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just curious, can you give a rough estimate of how many of your members are residents of Mountlake Terrace?
We have, I think it was 37 of our members are Mountlake Terrace residents. Yeah.
Anyone else? About online, Commissioner Betcher, do you have any additional questions?
No, thank you, Dan.
All right, thank you. All right. Was there anyone else who was making a formal presentation? Just want to make sure, because I didn't catch you this first time. All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and open up to public comment. So I was kind of asking this before. Is there anybody who wishes to speak tonight who didn't get a chance to sign up on the sign-up sheet? All right, I am not hearing or seeing any, so it looks like we have 3 people. The first one, and I apologize if I mispronounce the names here, Josh, is it Basca? Basha, sorry. I'm horrible at reading handwriting, so.
I've been called worse.
So go ahead and state your name and address for the record. You'll have 3 minutes, and just a reminder for those, or not a reminder, but more of a comment from the last meeting. I was reminded that we normally don't share our 3-minute time, so you could choose to use your 3 minutes or not, but you can't, only use half and then pass your half to someone else. So.
I'm not good at sharing anyway.
All right.
My name's Josh Basha. I'm in the Tallestwood Apartments. It's 4107 236th Street, and I work at Forest Crest Athletic Club, 4901 238th Street, and I'm the director of tennis. And I'm speaking to you today about community outreach, specifically in a couple of different areas. Starting with the Edmonds School District, specifically Mountlake Terrace High School. We have coaches that coach for us and Mountlake Terrace High School. We have a special a special relationship with them. We donate rackets, we donate balls. We donate court time for when their practices are rained out or their matches are rained out. That also extends to Linwood High School, Shorecrest High School, Shorewood High School. We donate to all 4 booster club drives to try to help support all athletics. We were the main sponsor for Westco for 3 of these high schools. Being a main Westco sponsor allows schools to get online donations from other sources. We provide discounted stringing services for high school players during the season. This is pre-COVID. The rules changed after COVID, but we volunteer in elementary schools to teach PE, tennis, to allow all students to have an opportunity to play tennis. We provide students with volunteering hours, and we provide student scholarships for players that can't afford tennis lessons. In addition, Forest Crest works closely with Ace Out Hunger. Happened to be wearing their shirt today. That worked out well. Ace Out Hunger offers free tennis lessons in exchange for canned food. We offer, we host an event at Forest Crest the Saturday before Thanksgiving every year. The last 3 years, we've raised 2,400 pounds of food. That food goes specifically to Concern for Neighbors, the only food bank in Mountlake Terrace. A rough estimate of food is 1.5 pounds of donated food is 1 meal. So 2,400 pounds of food is 1,600 meals we've given to residents of Mountlake Terrace. There is an organization called Work Opportunities. It is from an Edmonds School District special education parents group that want their children from special needs to be able to have opportunities to work in the community. We hire and we've worked with that organization for 7 or 8 years now. We actually won an award, the 2020 Outstanding Employer Award. When it comes to competition in playing, we host teams year-round. We host up to 840 players annually in these teams. These teams from Forest Crest are known to reach sectionals and nationals tournaments. This year we had 1 team win nationals and 1 team get second place at nationals. I don't know if you guys are familiar with tennis at all. Davis Cup is an international country against country pride thing that happens throughout the year. There's also Senior Davis Cup. That starts at the age of 30, goes all the way to the age of 85. This year, 3 players from Forest Crest made the 30 and over Davis Cup team representing the United States and Turkey, and we got second place. So Forest Crest is affecting grassroots tennis with the elementary schools, with the high schools, going all the way up to the age division international level.
All right, thank you.
That's what I got.
Okay.
Okay, I'm done? All right,
Yep.
fantastic, thank you.
All right, next person I have on my list is a Gerald Buckland.
I sent in a 3-page letter that was supposed to be distributed to all of you. I don't know if you've received it or not, but I would like to confirm all the talking points on here were basically pretty much already covered here tonight as well by everybody. So if anybody hasn't received this, I've got a copy I can share. Yes, no? Okay.
Mr. Buckland's comments were included in your packets.
Okay, yep. All right, so, yeah, basically.
Oh, sorry, state your name and address for the record.
My name's Gerald Buckland. I live in Bellevue, Washington. I'm not a Mountlake Terrace resident, though I have been in the past. My family owns the Forest Crest Athletic Facility. We're 3 years into the ownership now, since our father passed away, with me and my siblings, and we are trying to upgrade and make a nice facility and build nice housing around it, which is, I believe, all in concert with your comprehensive plan. We've built 11 houses at the expense of 6. Tore down 6, built 11. As proposed, we will be removing 2 houses, building 8, and not expanding our facility, but improving it and making it nice, as well as building all the nice houses as you saw in the pictures. It seems kind of crazy to me to not want to do that. And this is the only way we're able to do that. And we have to hold up the home construction until we have a plan for the tennis club, because zoning changes, codes change. We don't want to build out the houses and then find we needed another 10 feet of setback for something or something. So the club comes first. That's why we're on the push for this. And our private recreational facility offers so many things that the public ones don't. As Josh spoke to, of all of the programs, the private lessons for the neighborhood. All the kids in the neighborhood can walk to their tennis lessons in the summertime. We have a lot of them. And we see ourselves as a community asset, and we want to be even more so, and that's what we believe we're trying to do. So to me, it's as simple as that. We're looking to add housing, which is in your comprehensive plan, and make a nice facility that we believe to be an asset to the community. Simple as that. Simple terms. Brief overview. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the next person I have on the list is Ian Buckland.
I think everything's pretty much been covered.
Okay, thank you. Just one more check. Does anybody wish to speak who didn't sign up on the list? All right, I am not hearing or seeing any, so looks like I got a little comment here, just staff, if they would reference any written testimony that we received for this tonight.
Chair, I believe that we've done that. Was it 29 that we thought we had as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, which was comment period. You should have received a copy of all those comments.
All right, so since there is no one else from the public who wishes to speak, oh.
I know Anita, she spoke at the last meeting. She sent in a letter that she wanted read because she wasn't allowed to be here because she was at her own meeting tonight. So she confirmed with me this afternoon that she sent the letter in or an email in.
Is there,
Specific comments in.
if she wanted that read, is there anybody who wants to then?
Well, it was sent to the city, the planning department.
We received Anita's comment, and it's included in the materials.
Okay,
But if someone wants to read it
yeah.
on their behalf, they could, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
public comment is still open, so if anybody from the public wishes to read the letter, as long as within the 3 minutes you can read it. But yeah, it was included in our,
For the public comment to be read because she was not allowed to be here.
yeah. Like I said, if anybody from the public who wishes to read the letter, you have 3 minutes, you can do it. But we're not going to read it out loud.
I can put it up on the screen if someone wants to read it off the screen.
If I can read it. Oh, boy.
And then even though I know you're reading someone else's letter, go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
Ian Buckland, 4809 238th Street Southwest, Mountlake Terrace. So I'm in support of the zoning text amendment for private recreational facilities as brought forth under permit number PZA 23-0001 by the Forest Crest Athletic Club. I echo and coincide with the numerous comments that have been submitted for the record. FCAC is an invaluable resource to the community and is in desperate need of upgrades. I would like to address how this application meets the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and offer an argument to staff's recommendation of denial for this application. The policy meets the following comprehensive plan goals and policies. Policy CL 1.10 provide recreational programs, parks, and trails that accommodate a variety of interests and abilities. Goal EV-2, encourage business that add value to the community and region. Policy EV.2.2, encourage a business climate that attracts new business, expands opportunities for residents to meet their needs within the city, and promotes a healthy tax base. Goal LU-1, sense of place and connectedness. Policy LU 1.2, consider the identities and needs of existing residential neighborhoods and non-residential areas. Goal LU-2, efficient land use. Policy LU 2.3, encourage innovative land use patterns and site development where appropriate. Goal LU 3, variety of land uses. Policy LU 3.4, provide for land uses that respect the diversity of people, social groups, and lifestyles. Policy EV 2.14, encourage business investment and retention consistent with the city's target employment of 9,486 by the year 2035. Goal RPOS-1, ensure that all parks and recreational facilities in Mountlake Terrace are safe, clean, and green. Policy RPOS 1.1, all parks and recreational facilities meet current safety standards and are universally accessible. Goal RPOS-2, provide fun and diverse recreational opportunities that support the health, wellness, and engagement of all community members. Policy RPOS 2.2, regional scale recreational facilities attract visitors from surrounding communities and beyond. Goal RPOS-4, strengthen the local communities of Mountlake Terrace by providing places and opportunities for people and local businesses to connect with one another and thrive. Policy RPOS 4.2, recreational facilities are a key community meeting place for both formal and informal gatherings. Staff's conclusions of law. Private recreation facilities may be compatible use in RS zones if criteria for approval adequately mitigates adverse impacts to adjacent surrounding properties. This conclusion actually supports approval of the zoning text amendment. Criteria can be written to adequately mitigate adverse impacts to adjacent and surrounding properties. As proposed, the criteria to approve private recreation facilities in RS zones does not fully address compatibility with adjacent surrounding residential land uses. This application is for a zoning text amendment. While it is the understanding that private recreational facilities would be permitted with a conditional use permit, the criteria for a CUP has not been addressed at this time. The CUP application will fully address the CUP criteria and show that the use will be compatible with adjacent and surrounding properties.
Okay, so your 3 minutes is up, but if anybody else wanted to finish reading the rest of the letter, they can.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Quinn Tran. I don't live in Mountlake Terrace, I live in Linwood. The city is in the process of updating the comprehensive plan as required by the Growth Management Act, the GMA. The single-family residential zoning districts will most likely be replaced by a zoning designation that allows middle housing. The state legislature has passed current legislation that requires middle housing in most jurisdictions. This shift in planning will change the look of the typical single-family neighborhood. The updated land use element will address this, and there will be a chance to include recreational uses, such as private recreational facilities. Some items to consider: only allowing private recreational facilities in the RS 4,800 zoning district, not all single-family zoning districts. Changing the urban low residential classifications in the comprehensive plan to medium density to allow middle housing and associated recreational uses. Consider stricter criteria proposed in MTMC 19.30.040. Thank you for your consideration, and please recommend approval of this zoning text amendment to City Council. Sincerely, Anita Marrero.
And you still have time if you wanted to make any comments yourself.
Sure. I'm actually a kind of new to Washington. The Forest Crest Tennis Club was my first tennis club. When I first got there, I looked at the club and I was like, this place is honestly kind of not what I expected. So with the text amendment and their ability to upgrade and change the facility, it's actually going to be very beneficial to the neighboring neighborhood. Because if I lived in one of those houses, I wouldn't want to stare at a blank concrete wall. out my window. So, and seeing nicer, fresher courts will actually be a positive change for the whole neighborhood. That's about it.
Thank you. All right, just check one more time. Anybody else who didn't sign up wish to speak? I think just about everybody has. Just want to double check. All right, not seeing any indication that anybody else would wish to speak. I know it's not in the script, but probably should double check. Is there anybody online who wishes to speak?
There's no one online.
No one online. Okay, just got to double check. Technology. All right, so since there isn't anybody from the public who wishes to speak now, I'm looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
I have a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Hearing, I'll just double check. I think there might have been a delay. Commissioner Betcher, your motion, or you were just saying yes to closing it, right?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, and then opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. The public hearing is now closed. I just want to confirm with staff the next step here. Now that we've had a chance to both listen to staff presentation and listen to the applicant's presentation plus their public comment, and since they have brought up things or proposals that weren't included previously, does Planning Commission still have an opportunity to discuss or ask any additional questions from staff, or our only option at this point is just to move forward with a vote?
You can ask questions of staff at this point after you close the public hearing, correct?
Okay.
And open it up for consideration.
Sure. Okay, so does anybody on the Planning Commission have any additional questions for staff? Yeah, go ahead.
Right, so it sounded like they were making a lot of concessions, like willing to make some changes to their proposal. Did you hear that the same way I did? And did any of their offers, would they change your recommendation based on what they said tonight?
I mean, I think we heard generally that, some things, it's not part of the official proposal, I guess, right now. So there's two options, which would be the Planning Commission could direct staff to work with the applicant further, or the applicant could propose to come back to the Planning Commission with an amended proposal addressing certain things depending on where Planning Commission would like to, if and would they like to see additional things changed on the proposal, or move the proposal forward as proposed, or recommend denial of the proposal. So it's, at this point, as staff, I don't know that I feel confident that we've caught everything to change the proposal at this point, or that there's agreement over each concern, if you will. But so that's, I would say that's where staff stands at this point.
Okay. And it looks like Commissioner Betcher has his hand raised.
Yeah, so as a procedural question, we pretty much, our three options tonight are either approve, deny, or it sounds like there's an option where we can send this back to staff and have it be worked out a little bit further.
Correct.
Thank you.
I would say if the applicant is in agreement with doing that at this juncture too, if they were willing to change some of their proposal. I'm not sure what is a concern of the Planning Commission in full with what staff recommended or staff outlined, so that would be helpful if that's the course.
Does anybody have any specific criteria that was brought up that they'd like to see reworked or retooled? Commissioner Betcher.
Thanks. So yeah, I think one of the things I would like to see is sort of the staff being in alignment.
Commissioner Betcher, could you're kind of hard to hear. Can you speak up, please?
Yes. So can you hear me now?
Half and half.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
We heard yes, and then everything kind of trailed off after that.
Just a second. Sorry, it's a little echoing here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So one of the things I would like to see is the staff recommendation that is to recommend it. Voting against the staff recommendation, I think, is a little bit challenging. I think there's still some more work to be done in this, and so getting a little bit closer in alignment is something I would kind of like to see with that before I feel comfortable voting definitively yes.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, my only comment, I guess, to staff, if we were to send it back, is I'd like to hear more information on being 500 feet away from an arterial or being on an arterial. That seems to me like probably the biggest physical impediment to being able to work on this together. And so any other recommendations that we have or comparisons to other code? I know that I'd like to fully understand that.
Yeah, I
And if there's
believe, I
mitigations.
can't remember what city required, was it Shoreline? Or was the arterial requirement at?
Okay. I believe that was our code, actually, that says golf courses, to cite a golf course in a single household zone, it has to be in at least a minor arterial, which is even more stringent than the city engineer's recommendation of any arterial. So yeah, I didn't find that in other cities' codes.
Yeah, that was from our city engineer recommendation. So I guess there is either taking that recommendation or, a potential alternative would be a traffic study being a requirement of each proposal as it came before the hearing examiner for a conditional use permit would be a potential alternative, depending on location. So typically under the heading of an arterial, you would have a collector street, you'd have a minor arterial and a major arterial under that kind of broad heading. And then the other street classifications would be more like a residential street. And so like Sarah said, a golf course kind of is called out in our code. I think, we can all recognize that a golf course is probably not going to be built in the city of Mountlake Terrace. We have, some sections of our code that are quite old. I'm not sure when we put the golf course language in there, but, we still find things like a roller skating rink and, some particular uses where, yeah, maybe, but not realistic. So I think the concern was from, and I'm not trying to speak for the city engineer because I'm not the city engineer, but just of that, the traffic and the traffic volumes potentially of a higher use in a residential zone and potentially the concern and adequacy of the roadway. So, but that's an alternative that you guys could, consider.
I have, Commissioner Betcher, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I know I've already kind of taken up a lot of time. Can you hear me better now, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think there are a couple things I'd also like to see a little bit more addressed. One is a little bit more defined impacts, and addressing it particularly for things like
Commissioner Betcher, we can't hear you again.
oh. How is this?
Oh, much better.
Okay, good. So one of the things I'd like to see addressed is a little bit more detail on impact mitigation, things like street improvements and traffic calming and whatnot as part of the development criteria. And then sort of the other, in addition to whatever things have been highlighted regarding lighting and stuff like that. The other criteria I'd like to see addressed is, I think it was alluded to, is sort of, this is a bit different. You've got establishing a minimum lot size rather than maximum lot size, which for an RSN is something I would typically expect to see. So maybe working out a little bit more things like minimums and maximums, or maybe like thresholds of like for criteria based on the size of this facility. Like if it starts smaller and then goes, works its way up, like maybe something small doesn't have all that much impact, but larger, like you start having maximum sizes, maybe it's not necessarily facilities, I guess, for one, but then also
Commissioner Betcher, I'm gonna step in real quick. I'm sorry, you're kind of cutting in and out. We're catching like maybe every 15th word.
Okay.
We got a good suggestion here that maybe sounds like you have a lot of comments. Maybe submit them writtenly.
I can do that. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. Sorry, everyone.
No worries. No, don't worry about it. Staff, I had a kind of a quick, more procedural question in terms of next steps. Since there are a lot of things that the commission or that the applicant is saying they're willing to work with the city on, but to move this process forward, there are certain key things that staff has identified as a reason why they're making the recommendation to deny it. If the Planning Commission, and again, we haven't made a vote yet, if the Planning Commission were to deny or I guess not recommend the adoption of this text amendment to City Council, would the applicant still have the opportunity to work with staff on some of these issues before City Council sees this, or will it only be what exactly we see tonight, or is approved or denied tonight? Or if, like I said, there is a third option, just for them to work with staff before we make a formal recommendation. But because we don't know what we're going to do yet, if the Planning Commission feels that at this point, even with these things that staff is, or that the applicant is willing to work on with staff, but none of the things that they've called out addresses the Planning Commission's concern. Planning Commission says, no, we don't recommend. The applicant still has the opportunity to still work with the city on revising some of their proposals for City Council? Or is it only, like, once it moves on from us, it's kind of set in stone at that point?
I mean, it could move on with our recommendation of denial, but I think a better way to do that, if you guys decide that you think if certain things are addressed. For instance, I heard Adam say two things, lighting and maybe considering a sizing scale based on requirements based on size, proposed size of a facility. my recommendation would always be to continue this public hearing if the applicant is willing to try to work out some of these things that we could potentially come to agreement on and bring that back before the Planning Commission to see if a recommendation of approval could be forwarded to City Council. But I think that's a decision that the applicant would want to agree to, or if not, then, you guys need to consider what your comfort level is with how you move this thing forward. I think without having clear understanding of what would be changed, it's a little bit difficult. To me, it would be a straight approval or recommend approval or recommend denial. If in fact it got moved forward, I can't remember when the work session for City Council is. I believe it's the first part of January. I would just caution that we're going into the Christmas holiday. And so depending on people's availability of what we could work out if this got moved forward to try to keep that schedule. If we could try to do that, we would. But so I guess hopefully that's clear. I don't think that sounded very clear, did it? My recommendation for the best solution is if Planning Commission wants us to try to see if we can address maybe some of the compatibility issues and the applicant is willing to do that, then let us go back and try to address some of those issues and bring it back to the Planning Commission for a recommendation and continue the public hearing.
In that option, would we be making any kind of formal motion tonight then, or would we just?
You would continue the public hearing.
Okay. Again, it's been a while since we've continued a public hearing. I can't even remember the last time it's been. So would the Planning Commission, would somebody have to make a motion to continue the public hearing?
Correct,
okay.
Yeah. And I guess what I would recommend is to see if the applicant is willing to revise their proposal for you to continue your public hearing. Since your next meeting falls on December 25th, it would be the second Monday of January. And I can't tell you right now what that date is, but you would continue it to that date. You have to continue it to a date certain. So whatever that second Monday of January is. January 8th.
And then I know a lot of what was referenced tonight in terms of making changes or adjustments or kind of a drop dead. No, it just would kill it altogether. We're very site specific, but this is an amendment that would apply citywide, so we have to take that into consideration as well.
Correct. And, I know that's difficult. Like we've talked about, this is not a site-specific rezone request. This is a text amendment. And so the criteria you're establishing would be to establish criteria that could be utilized in other locations in the city, meeting that criteria. So, correct.
So on the community-wide impact, is there any language in there for is there language that requires like daylighting studies or anything like that? We were talking about how if this is up against a residential zone, we're concerned about how that might impact neighboring buildings. And so if this is going to be something that we try to pass citywide, I think one of the biggest concerns I would have is if this was to be applied to another property, how do we analyze how that would impact neighboring residential homes?
So I think what we tried to call out, which I think from that compatibility standpoint from planning staff, was lighting, location, shielding of lighting, hours of operation, noise. So, if you're doing indoor, not so much for noise impacts, but if you're doing outdoor recreation, then that gets back to more of that trying to mitigate for hours of operation. What does that look like if you were living adjacent to a recreational facility and people were recreating outdoors, then putting some parameters on that in a single-family residential neighborhood or in a residential neighborhood, lighting requirements, those types of things.
And I guess I was referring to more like sun shading, so the way the sun might affect
No.
neighboring buildings from, is that included in the lighting? And
No,
no,
it's not.
because in my mind, that could be a concern if it's not addressed anywhere else.
Yeah, the only requirement we have for that is when we're talking about in some of our town center zones where they're adjacent to residential. And this is where we see building heights a lot taller, just kind of those impacts adjacent to. It sounds like the applicant is willing to maybe go to standard building height, which is kind of, consistent throughout these residential zones. And then with appropriate setback requirements where you're not really at that 0 lot line or you're not building up 8 stories, then you're effectively, that's what you're trying to do, is effectively trying to mitigate those impacts already by those standards.
Okay. So that's covered.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments for staff? Yep, no? Okay, just want to make sure. So it sounds like we kind of have 3 options, but I guess part of that, before making a decision, I guess staff would, want to get some sort of confirmation that the applicant would want to work on maybe retooling this proposal with staff. Yes. Okay. I'll just repeat. The applicant said yes. Sorry, since they're not mic'd up. So I guess at this point, oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you just repeat, are you looking for any more direction from us about what we want to see reworked? I heard you mention lighting. I've heard traffic mentioned.
Well, maybe we can go back over our slide presentation just to call out what our recommendations were and see if you want to, which ones of those do you want us to address? Do you want us to address them all? Or that would be very helpful with kind of what you want to see with some further provisions maybe put in place. So Sarah's pulling it up here. So that would be really helpful if we kind of get a consensus, and then that's a starting point for us to work with the applicant to try to resolve these differences. No, I would go through this, I think, because we kind of outlined.
Okay. With the supported, or just start with opposed?
Kind of what we're not meeting
Okay.
head to head.
All right. Can you read them out?
Sure. So locating next to a public park would you like to keep that as part of the criteria? Or, we were recommending removing this as part of the criteria, that it doesn't necessarily need to be located next to a public park or recreational facility. Just get a consensus whether that's important to Planning Commission to keep that criteria in or not.
Seems to me your recommendation saying it's unnecessary and doesn't align with distributing the amenities equitably. I would agree with your recommendation on that. And I don't think it's going to impact this specific proposal as well.
I agree with the city's recommendation on it as well.
I agree as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like there's consensus, and I would add, I think there's, it doesn't need to be, a requirement, plus it might actually even offer some confusion to the public on where a public, what is considered public versus private, so.
Okay.
might confuse them.
It sounds like the applicant is willing to revisit the height maximum based on their testimony, so we can go back and talk about that. Setbacks, we can talk about setbacks with the applicant. And remember, we'll have a conversation. It doesn't mean that the applicant's going to agree to everything, but what we can do is bring back what we have a consensus on, and then you can see where we didn't reach maybe consensus, and then you can make your recommendation from that. Lot coverage, I believe we have a 40% max, and the proposal is a 60% maximum lot coverage. So, I mean, I guess we can, if you want us to, we can kind of go down this list of staff recommendations where we think it could be more consistent, and then we can bring back to you what's been agreed upon by the applicant and staff, and then that might be easier, and then we can go from there. And, the applicant could modify their proposal or elect not to bring back whatever modifications that they want to for that continued public hearing, if that works for everybody. Okay, so we'll do that. So we'll work to try to make sure that we get this back. You guys will need to continue the public hearing to a date certain, which would be to make a motion for January 8th. And then we will try to get these things worked out in that interim.
You said January 8th?
January 8th, yeah.
Okay. All right, so just double checking if anybody else has any questions, comments. Check in one more time with our online commissioner.
I think it's a good process.
Okay.
I guess the only other thing staff would add, and I'm sorry, I apologize to the applicant because I said staff, but are you guys good with January 8th? Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure with the holidays and everything, so. Okay, sounds like January 8th is what we'll be shooting for.
All right. And just one more check. Sound like everybody kind of said their comments, and sound like there was kind of sort of consensus. Staff just work with the applicant because staff already laid out a lot of things that they're willing to, or that they're recommended changes to the to that. I would add specifically, I tend to be in agreement with the city engineer in terms of the sighting on an arterial. So if that's going to be changed, I definitely want to see some, some sort of process that, will mitigate that fact. Because again, this isn't site specific, this is citywide. So this has the potential to cause, traffic impacts in a lot of areas where no traffic exists right now. So we have to keep, we have to think of things like that. Just because it doesn't seem feasible that a development could happen, once it's in the books, it can happen, and that's the way we have to treat it. So.
Yeah, I think a recommendation that's consistent with everything else. It does sound like this might have come from an older golf course related, which to me doesn't seem consistent with the rest of code.
Yeah, but the city engineer's recommendation was their own.
Yeah, that was more recent.
Yep.
So I think it's just, what can we do to mitigate impacts of traffic in a residential zone? What does that look like?
Okay. And so I just kind of want to be clear, looks like we have three options on the table right now moving forward. We can either move to recommend the zoning text amendment, we can move to deny the zoning text amendment, or we can move to extend the public, or to continue the public hearing. So in that case, would anybody like to make a motion? So we got option 1 and 2 is here, and then option 3 would be down there.
Okay. So motion, I move to recommend or deny or extend public hearing, approval of a zoning text amendment for, did I get that right?
No.
No, I did not.
So there's 3 options. Sorry, it's been a long time since we've kind of done this with COVID and everything. So there's 3 motions that we can make. We can move to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment. We can move to deny approval of the zoning text amendment, or we can move to continue the public hearing to January 8th to allow staff and the applicant more time to maybe make some changes and then bring that back to us.
Are we individually voting, or are we just?
I think this is only an assumption, so please speak up, but it seems like from the questions that I'm hearing from Planning Commission and staff, it seems to be that there's interest in continuing the public hearing and allowing staff and the applicant to work through some of these issues and come back to us. Am I understanding that correctly?
Okay. So it's,
yeah.
Okay, motion, I move to continue the public hearing to January 8th. Can I get a second?
All right, I have a motion to continue the public hearing to January 8th. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. We'll go ahead and continue the public hearing to January 8th.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff. You've provided a lot of information. Thank you, applicant, for being willing participants in this and, working through this and, going back to the drawing board and, trying to come up with a product that will work for everyone. So thank you again.
I'll also say what I've been telling my team at work. Holidays are coming up, so the quicker you can get the work in to the staff, the quicker this will all get in front of us and we can make a decision in January.
And before we move on to the next agenda item, another procedural question. Say January 8th comes, staff, applicant, they've been working on it, but they just didn't have enough time with the holidays and whatnot. Would we just make another motion then to just continue it to the next meeting?
Correct, yeah. We would just make a motion that we needed more time, and then we could move to continue the public hearing to a date. It needs to be a date certain, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely we could do that. The hope is that, we could get there by January 8th, but for whatever reason, if, we need a little bit more time, a couple of more weeks, then that's a potential.
Sure. Great. Thank you. All right. So next agenda item, presentation of comprehensive plan update, Vision 2044.
There should be the presentation.
Oh, yeah. Actually, why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute recess?
Okay.
Let staff get set up. Let everybody have kind of a quick stretch your legs break. All right. So we'll go ahead and continue now. Staff's all set up. So again, item number 6. Presentation of the Comprehensive Plan Update Vision 2044.
Thank you, Chair. So as we outlined as part of our Vision 2044 process, instead of Planning Commission and City Council getting information at the end of the process, after we have a draft from the Comp Plan Advisory Group, we're trying to bring this information to you as we move forward through this process. So we gave the City Council an update last Thursday night, and want to do the same with Planning Commission. We would typically bring it to Planning Commission and then council, but because of the holidays, we're kind of a little bit twisted this month, but the intent is to bring it to the Planning Commission and then council moving forward from this process. But I wanted to introduce our two presenters this evening. And we have Sierra Carson from OTAC as the prime consultant on the project. I think most of you have met Sierra. And on joining us electronically is David Fisk. He's with Leland Consulting Group. Leland is a sub-consultant on the project, working on housing and economic development, and also doing some additional market analysis for the city at this point. So I'll turn it over to Sierra at this point, and they can, her and David will be presenting the information this evening.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, commissioners, for having us here this evening. We have a short little presentation here to give you an update just on what we've been doing on the comp plan and what some of our next steps are. So there we are. So here's a brief agenda of what we're going to be talking through tonight. We have just a couple slides on a refresher on just what the comprehensive process is and what the process will be, what we have done already and what we will be doing over the next several months. We're going to do an overview of what our SEPA process is, and specifically what our SEPA scoping process is. We're currently in a public comment period for the EIS that will be done for the comp plan. And then I'll turn things over to David, and David will run through an intro of the housing element, some of the analysis that they are currently doing and will be doing as part of this process, and give a summary of some of the discussions we've been having about with the CPAG, the Comp Plan Advisory Group, about growth. And then we have space for questions and discussion at the end. So on the comp plan process and timeline, just to bring back some of the information that we've presented previously, the comprehensive plan is that 20-year vision and roadmap for Mountlake Terrace's future. Meeting those requirements from the state and from the region are really important to ensure that the city will continue to be eligible for funding. We'll be talking a lot tonight about some of the housing requirements. So just something to keep in mind as we move through this process. We want to make sure that the city is meeting its vision, but also meeting requirements that have been coming down from state law. This is a plan that will guide decisions on infrastructure, housing, and more. We're covering a wide range of topics, from parks to housing to land use to transportation to facilities. Got a lot of ground to cover over the next couple of months. And this is the framework that will provide that guidance towards other city functional plans as well. So just to look at the timeline here, we've been working on this project since about mid last year, going through those initiate and analyze phases. We're really moving fully forward into that preparing phase. So we'll be coming forward with different modules over the next couple months about all the different topic areas in the plan as we develop that full draft plan, aiming to be have a complete plan summer of 2024, and then moving into the adoption process fall of 2024. And then just a quick recap on what we have talked about and what we will be talking about. Last time we spoke to you was October 4th during that Joint Council and Planning Commission meeting where we did that Comp Plan 101 briefing on purpose. We also on November 13th held a SEPA scoping meeting, an open house, which was open to the public, to commission and council members as well. And tonight here on December 11th, we're giving that refresh on the comp plan organization, the SEPA process updates. We'll be giving a little bit of an update on engagement, and then David again will be talking about housing. We will be continuing our conversation about housing over the next couple of months. So we'll be back on January 8th and on February 7th to talk about ongoing discussions about housing and land use, as well as economic development. Or I think economic development will be in March. But we really have this work plan coming to you every month over the next several months, just to walk through all of these topic areas to make sure we can have some really important conversations. And then the goal would be to have a recommendation to council by August 12th. So that's our recap on schedule. I'm going to move on to talking through the SEPA environmental impact process and EIS scoping process. So you may be familiar with the State Environmental Policy Act, the SEPA process. This is a process that's used to identify and analyze the environmental impacts associated with government decisions, both smaller development projects as well as large non-project actions, such as the comprehensive plan. And an environmental impact statement is required for any proposal that is likely to have a significant environmental impact, which the comprehensive plan has been determined to have an environmental impact. So we will be using the EIS to mitigate any of those probable impacts. Part of the EIS process that we are doing is called the scoping period. The purpose of scoping is to identify the elements that need to be evaluated for impacts in the environmental impact statements and to narrow those issues down to those that are significant. We've also provided a public comment period to the public and to other agencies to comment on those key environmental issues and concerns. That determination of significance and request for comments was issued on November 13th, and that comment period will be closing this Wednesday on December 13th. We will be compiling those comments and adding them to the official record for the project. As part of the scoping process, we've been doing lots of engagement. So like I said, on November 13th, we held a in-person scoping meeting / open house. We had lots of boards for participants to write their comments and answer questions on. We collected feedback on concerns as well and challenges as well as aspirations about bunch of different topic areas such as land use and housing, transportation, parks, capital facilities, and economic vitality. It was I think a rousing success. We had this whole council chamber full of people really for a couple hours that night. So I think we had great turnout, and we've got a lot of really fantastic feedback that we'll be using through the comp plan writing process. We're also looking at sort of, getting some feedback on people's neighborhoods. So we had these fun maps for people to comment on as well. In addition to the in-person open house, we also are currently hosting an online open house. This is a web page that has all the same information, boards, maps, factoids that we had on the in-person posters. This is a website that's currently live and linked through the city's website, and we'll be collecting official comments for the SEPA comment period up until the end of day on Wednesday, December 13th, but this resource will continue to stay open throughout the process so we can continue to collect feedback on some of these really important questions, such as challenges on housing, as well as, transportation issues, to name a few. And so in addition to that SEPA scoping engagement that we've been doing, we have also recently closed out the visioning survey. We presented a couple months ago about some of the initial feedback we received on the survey. We closed that at the end of November with a total of 268 responses, and we've gotten some really fantastic feedback, and then we've been reviewing the information received, and we'll be coming back at a later date to sort of present what the findings were from that survey. About a couple of the outreach items that we did on this survey. There's been blog posts, social media posts, several in-person events that city staff went to this summer to get the word out. And then we've also had these lovely posters posted around the city to direct people towards the city website to see other ways to engage on the plan. And I do believe that the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee did help pass out the posters as well to different businesses. And then links to the survey were also sent out to the city's contact list to multifamily residential building managers posted at different multifamily buildings, and also sent out to the Edmond School District Peach Jar. So we've gotten several different ways to get this sort of the word out on engagement for the comprehensive plan. So I think that wraps up my update on where we are in the process and where we are on engagement. We're also really working on housing right now, housing and land use and growth targets. So I'm going to pass it over to David to give an update on where we're at with those topics.
All right, thanks, Sierra. And good evening, commissioners. Just want to make sure, can you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I'm David Fisk. I'm an associate with Leland Consulting Group. We're based in Portland, Oregon. So thank you for accommodating me to call in virtually tonight. Yeah, I was just going to say, I can't control the slides on my end, so Sierra, I'm going to have to ask you to to move them for me. So appreciate that. Really briefly, just want to go over the topics I'll be discussing with y'all. This is the first time I've spoken with you on this commission. I know at least a couple of you were attending the CPAG meeting last week, so some of this will be a review. But because this is my first time speaking with you all, I just wanted to go over at a high level what the process of updating your housing element is. There's a few changes in this cycle because of the recent legislative changes, especially around housing. So I'm going to touch on that briefly, and then as Sierra indicated, share some of the key takeaways, the high-level points from the housing needs assessment that we've conducted for Mountlake Terrace, as well as the initial results from our land capacity analysis, which will have a bearing on the next steps for the housing element process. So with that, housing element update. So this slide shows the 7 steps as outlined by the Department of Commerce in their guidance document on updating your housing element. So as I mentioned, we've completed a housing needs assessment. I'll be sharing that with you today. Land capacity analysis says in progress. To date, we've completed an assessment based on your current zoning, and that's what I'll share with you today, but that will be updated going forward based on any recommended changes that come out of this process to your zoning code. And I have some separate slides on that, as well as these following two, so I won't get into detail on this slide, but adequate provisions and racially disparate impacts are two pieces that are new to this process based on the new legislation in HB House Bill 1220 and the Growth Management Act changes. And then there's the housing element review, which is, we've obviously been reviewing your existing housing element, but we'll be doing a deeper dive into your existing goals, policies, and implementation strategies, and how those need to be updated based on both the legislative requirements, but also the recommendations that come out of these conversations with you, as well as the advisory group and city council and through our public engagement process. And as Sierra indicated, over the next few months, we'll be coming back to you, not just with sort of the next steps on these first few, but then updated goals and policies, as well as the most important part of this, the implementation and monitoring steps towards the, once we actually have the draft recommendations together for you in a number of months. So next slide, please. So a few of these just in a little more detail. So land capacity analysis, as I mentioned, we have assessed the potential for housing under your current zoning and development regulations. And so what we're assessing, right, is does Mountlake Terrace have the capacity to meet the growth targets that have been allocated from the county and state? And so down on the bottom of this slide here, you see the population target, which is then converted into a housing target based on a calculation of household size. And the number that we're really focused on here is the net new need, that number of 7,683, which is the new number of housing units that Mountlake Terrace will have to accommodate by 2044. And then this chart on the right breaks that number down further into these housing or these income brackets. And so this is another part of the new requirements, which is to assess your housing capacity or land capacity based on housing need by income. And so I will come back to this in more detail and break down our results of the assessment in a number of slides. But the things to point out here is that for Mountlake Terrace, the major need is here in the lowest income brackets, 0 to 30% area median income, as well as 30 to 50, which is there'll be no surprise that there's a shortage and a need for affordable, subsidized affordable housing, which is mostly what we're looking at that income bracket across the region, right? But then on the other side of the spectrum, in the higher income bands, 100% of area median income and above is where the county and state believe there's going to be a pretty substantial need and demand of new housing within the city. So I'll touch on what that means when I get to the results of our analysis in a bit. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned adequate provisions as a new requirement. So while land capacity is looking at your future capacity, adequate provisions is looking at your historic production trends and projecting that forward, assessing whether or not the city is likely to actually meet that target that's been given to them, not just in capacity, but in actual production. And so that's another thing we're assessing at those same income bands that were mentioned before. And then if it appears that the city is unlikely to meet that target, then we will be assessing the barriers to that production, both all through development regulations, process obstacles, limited land availability, and funding gaps. And so this table on the right is just an example sort of a matrix to work through in that process. And so that's something that we'll be doing going forward as well. Next slide, please. And racially disparate impacts analysis is also a new component within based on the new legislation. And so we're working through a quantitative analysis right now, just to sort of understand at a baseline level some of the demographic and economic indicators related to housing specifically that are disproportionately impacting BIPOC and minority populations within the city. So we will be coming back to you next month with sort of our further findings and sort of explaining how that would tie into recommendations around housing in general, but will also be incorporated into the broader sort of spectrum of community engagement. And I know equity is a theme throughout the comp plan update process. But just wanted to point out again, this is another new part of the process in this update cycle that we will be sharing more detail about in the future. So just to sum that up, following last week's CPAG meeting, but as well as this meeting tonight, we will be conducting that adequate provisions assessment, as well as diving more deeply into your existing housing element and drafting up goals and policies to begin working towards those updates, as well as completing our analysis around land capacity analysis and racially disparate impacts. And then following the upcoming meetings in January and February is when we'll actually be updating those goals and policies and working on implementation strategies as we get towards the actual draft element and plan that we'll be sharing with you towards summer. So that's the high level process. Now to get into some of the work we've already been doing for you all. So key takeaways from the housing needs assessment. And I'm just gonna hit on the high level points here. And then as Sierra indicated, we will have some time for questions and discussion. So I'm gonna work through some data rather quickly today, but please, do raise any questions at the end. So this is showing your population growth as indicated by the growth target that I mentioned. And so if Mountlake Terrace does in fact grow until to meet that target by 2044, what that would mean is that the city would be growing at more than 4 times the rate as it has over the last decade. So of course, population growth in general is an important indicator for housing need, as the city, much like the region, is already experiencing a housing crunch. If that growth rate increases to this degree, of course, that will be felt even further. Next slide, please. And so Mountlake Terrace is also what would be considered a moderate income community. So together with that population growth, the existing population in Mountlake Terrace has a somewhat lower median household income compared to the county as a whole. And so what does that mean? It means as an increased demand by new residents comes into the city, of course, existing housing and new housing will become increasingly scarce and expensive. And so for a community that has a somewhat lower median household income, it means that it will become increasingly hard potentially to attain an affordable home within the city without addressing needs around new supply and other strategies around affordability. And so this next slide sort of hammers this home a little bit further. What this shows is 4 different household incomes and what they could afford to spend if they were trying to buy a home. And so the second one from the left here is the current, as of 2023, median household income of $91,000. And this shows is that that household could afford to buy a home at just under $350,000. I think we all know here that there are no homes that are selling for that price in Mountlake Terrace today. And in fact, the median home price is just under $600,000, $596. And so that would be affordable to a household making approximately $155,000 today. And that's less than 20% of the current households in the city that could afford that median home price. And well, as was shown or discussed a bit earlier in this meeting, there are homes, of course, selling for much higher than that as well. But there are also homes that are selling or are affordable to the median household income. And that's important to point out that that includes mostly condos and townhomes. So right, smaller units or not single family homes per se, but that'll be an important point as we get to talking about sort of the mix of housing and diversity of housing options in the city. Next slide, please. So still talking about affordability here, these charts just show the trends of increase in both rent and home values in the city. So on the left is looking at median gross rent over the last decade or so. And what you can see is that rents in Mountlake Terrace have increased roughly at the same rate as both the state and county, though rents are, slightly higher within the city of Mountlake Terrace. On the right, it includes rent also or in the blue, as well as home values in the green. And what this shows is comparing that to the increase in median household income in Mountlake Terrace. And so around 2015 is where we saw both rent and home values begin to increase at a higher rate than incomes, and especially home values, which nearly doubled over the past decade. And so again, as incomes have stagnated relative to rent and home prices, it's become increasingly difficult to afford a home or apartment in Mountlake Terrace. Next slide, please. So now switching over to looking at the existing housing stock in the city. So on the left in this pie chart shows Mountlake Terrace has a relatively diverse housing stock. And so what I mean by that is, right, so about 57% of housing in the city is still within single family homes. Most of those are detached homes, though some of them are attached. 15%, this is the dark blue, are in buildings of over 20 or more units. So an apartment building, a multifamily building. But then also interestingly, in the green here in the lower left, about 11% of the city's housing units are within that 2 to 4 unit range, which would be considered middle housing. And that's higher than many of your neighbors in other cities in the region. On the right here is looking at the age of this housing. And what stands out here is that compared to the rest of the county, the blue here is the older housing. And so Mountlake Terrace's housing stock is considerably older on average than the county as a whole. So there hasn't been as much housing built in recent years. In fact, most of the existing housing in Mountlake Terrace was built prior to the 90s. And so that, for one, that's a reason why there is some still relatively affordable housing in the city, but also means that maybe a lot of that housing is in need of maintenance and upgrades, which can be increasingly difficult to afford as years go by. And so looking at, this is a chart of the housing that has been permitted actually since the 90s. So what has been built since that majority of the housing in the city. And a few things to point out here are that, so again, at that middle housing range of 2 to 4 units, and that's the light blue, you can see that none of that housing has been permitted since or after 2001. So most of that housing, that 11% that was built, was prior to or the last 2 decades. And there's a considerable lull just in general permitting and production over about a decade until recent years when we've seen quite a bit of new multifamily development, which is the dark blue, which is really no surprise to everybody here, as there's been a lot of apartments built, especially in recent years in the town center and in Terrace Station by the light rail. And I should also mention that I know there have been a number of townhomes that have also been built in recent years, and that would be captured within the green. So actually within the single family residential permits on this chart. And this data set comes from the census, so it's not a perfect data set, though it's the best that we have. And so this actually doesn't even include some of the recent multifamily development that's happened or been permitted within just the last couple of years. So that blue piece of this would be larger towards the right end. So that sort of brings us to getting to land capacity now. So that's what exists and what's been built. Now looking forward, what and where could be built in the future. And so the way we conduct this analysis is looking at the buildable lands within the city. And so this is part of the buildable lands report, where lands within Mountlake Terrace are indicated as vacant or redevelopable. And the pink here is also pending, which means these are developments that have been built or housing that's been built since 2020, which is the cutoff of when we're assessing progress towards the growth targets, the growth allocation. And so those would be removed from the buildable land or the available land in the land capacity, though those housing units would be counted towards your target. So for the remainder, though, what stands out here is that there's really a lack of available land outside of the town center. Most of that available capacity would be found there. And the way that these are calculated, obviously vacant is vacant, but the redevelopable is mostly looking at improvement to land value ratio, as well as a number of some other factors, but assessing what is most likely to redevelop based on sort of development feasibility. And so most of that is found in the town center. So when we get onto our next slide of actually looking at land capacity, see how that bears out. So before that, I just wanted to revisit. So this is again the growth allocation broken down by income brackets. And the way that sort of the guidance and the requirements by Commerce and for assessing your housing need or housing capacity by income is that these income brackets are broken down into these three categories of low income, 0 to 80% AMI, moderate income, 80 to 120 area median income, and high income over 120%. And what we're looking at essentially is the zoning within your city that allows these different types of housing, which are then categorized into what is roughly affordable within these income brackets. And so we're basically looking at the different zones in the city, what housing is permitted to be built there, and then that's where we get the capacity by income. And on the next slide is a little more information just on how that breaks down. There's a lot of information on here, but so roughly speaking, how this works out. So really low density zones, so single family zones would be considered where to meet that need of higher income households. Low-rise multifamily or mid-rise multifamily, which is a lot of what's been built in recent years, is technically categorized within that low income, 50 to 80% AMI. Most of that has been built recently is closer to the 80%, and even some of it into the moderate income brackets. But then also that's where there's the potential for most subsidized housing, which is apartments most typically. So that's where the capacity for extremely low and very low income households could be met as well. And there's these other categories as well. So on the next slide, which almost get into the end of my slides here, these are the results of this capacity assessment. And I realized after some of our previous, this is the third time we presented this information to you all, and we should change the title of this the next time. So while technically by that assessment, by those measures, there's a deficit in the moderate to high income housing. But I think the bigger takeaway here is when we look at capacity at the citywide scale is there's just a general overall deficit to the citywide target by close to 3,500 units. And, or sorry, that's not correct. 3,500 though within the moderate and high income brackets. But what we're seeing is a surplus within that lower income 0 to 80% AMI. And the reason for that, again, is because most of that existing capacity is within your high density zones within the town center where apartments, that mid-rise and low-rise multifamily could be built. Whereas there's simply not enough land within or to build the housing types, nor are there zones that allow for a diversity of housing that would meet these moderate income housing types or provide those moderate income housing types or higher income housing types. Very little redevelopable land where single family homes or some denser, more diverse ownership housing types could be built, like townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, or others that may meet some of that need. So I just want to pause really quick though, just not to misconstrue the message on this slide, in that what this isn't saying is that the city needs to figure out a way to build more single family homes, because as we saw on that map, the city is land constrained. There's no real land to expand the pie, so to say, to build more single family homes. There is opportunity to redevelop existing single family homes into other single dwellings. But really what this is showing is that while there's some of this surplus capacity of apartments, some of that may actually be affordable or more expensive, I should say, and meet that moderate income need. But in general, there's expected to be a demand from higher income households moving to Mountlake Terrace. And so without increasing the overall supply, that would mean that those households would be putting pressure on the prices of existing homes within the city. So understanding or sort of working towards solutions for how to address that deficit, not necessarily by increasing more single family homes, but other housing options that can meet those needs, is really the sort of at the crux of the discussion and question that we've been having, both internally in our team and with staff, but also at the advisory group and with City Council last week. So the next slide is to have a brief sort of summary of those high points. So from that work, really what we're saying is the demand for housing is expected to continue to grow, right, in the city and region. The county is assuming that Mountlake Terrace will feel that pressure of higher income earners moving into the city and just more people in general. Because of that deficit in available land to meet that projected housing need based on your existing zoning, that means that without additional supply, prices will likely continue to grow, even further beyond what the average resident can afford. And so a need to encourage development of housing types other than single family detached homes while increasing overall supply in areas with access to jobs, transit, and amenities is both sort of within the smart planning, but also meets both your existing comprehensive planning goals as well as the countywide and PSRC metro-wide planning goals. But of course, with this increased supply and demand, more importantly, it means that there's risks of a displacement of existing residents. And so understanding any strategies the city may be able to take to alleviate some of that, as well as just increasing overall affordable housing types is really the challenge. And so the last slide I have here is just to so we presented all this information last week at that advisory group meeting. I think this is one of you actually standing here in this picture, attending that activity. We did a mapping activity to discuss where could the city accommodate some of this new growth to try and increase the overall capacity and look at housing diversity options. And some of the high-level takeaways from that discussion and activity are shown here, that overall, from the whole group, there was a support for increasing the diversity of housing in general, looking to create a healthier mix of affordability to meet those growth targets. There were a lot of strategies proposed around increasing the potential for further mixed use and multifamily development, both within the town center, but also outside of that around existing commercial nodes, especially the CB, commercial or the community business zone, as that would be close to existing amenities and neighborhoods. So seeing that as a sensible or a potential area to increase further density. Also, though, the expansion of denser housing types, especially middle housing types within single-family neighborhoods, close to light rail and sort of radiating out from the town center. So potentially looking at expanding the RST or transitional zone, allowing up to 4 units or possibly more, as this transitional zone is predominantly a townhome zone, or at least historically has been, where at least in some cases it has produced more than 4 units. There's a potential to expand that out further to allow for additional housing options within that area close to the light rail. But again, there was a particular note mentioning strategies around how can we protect some of the more naturally occurring affordable apartments within the city, as well as mobile homes, as particularly in the northern part of the city, where a lot of those older, more affordable apartments are, as well as the couple of mobile home parks that are in the city. And so that's going forward is a challenge that all cities are facing. And I wish I could say that there's a silver bullet to solving the issues of displacement and affordability more generally. But we'll be looking into some of the strategies around tenant protections and otherwise that may be applicable here in Mountlake Terrace. And so that's something that we'll also be coming back to discuss with you all at a later date. So that is the end of my slides. And now I think we have some time for questions if there are any.
I've got one real quick. At the last meeting, CPAG meeting that you had, as you discussed, the exercise that took place, you provided a nice little primer map for them, to sort of get in their mind, hey, where would you be interested in, or, think growth should go? And then, they broke up into groups, and, it's a really nice process. And I was just, as I was watching that, it made me wonder, where will the Planning Commission get a similar opportunity to partake in that type of exercise or to provide that type of input?
That's more of a question, actually, I think for Sierra, maybe staff, in terms of our process and meetings. I know that just in terms of the next steps from that CPAG meeting, we will be over the coming month or a few weeks really, sort of going back and refining some of the feedback we got from CPAG into more specific growth scenarios. Basically, where could that growth happen and what would that actually look like in terms of zoning changes and some of the development regulations or housing types that could be allowed. And so then there'll be a more sort of refined version to vet and discuss. But I don't, as of now, believe we had something on the agenda to actually have a similar activity. But I will throw that question over to Sierra and Christy, who have a better idea of our agendas coming up.
Yeah, so I can take a stab at sort of furthering the answer to that question. We are at a point with our work, I think, on the plan where just with the timeline that we're on, we will be working through housing and land use topics over the next couple of months. We'll be coming back to you with policies and goals, as well as additional information about the growth targets and growth alternatives over the next couple of meetings. I think that we are still in discussions sort of about what the timeline is and alternatives. So I think that's a conversation we can have with staff at what is an appropriate level here to come back to you all with an activity. But I think, like David said, we had this initial conversation with the CPAG about, where could that growth go citywide, and there will be, I think, additional conversations talking about scale and really vetting the alternatives that will be analyzed within the EIS that I was speaking to earlier in the presentation. So there will be additional opportunities to comment and talk through the growth in Mountlake Terrace and where that growth might potentially be going citywide. Christy, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, we're currently discussing, and we're going to discuss further on Thursday, of adding an additional meeting in January. When we're talking about housing and land use, you know, it's a lot of intense work. We wanted to try to put the information that we gathered from the CPEG together before we presented it to you all in the Planning Commission. So I think it might be helpful to get all the general information and look at what they've done, and then have the Planning Commission further refine that work that was done at the CPEG as we move forward, if that works. So you guys to be able to see all that work as a body, and then add to and refine those comments, if that works. So I think we're trying to set, I can't remember, an additional comp plan advisory group meeting. It's kind of mid-January too, to gather that information and then bring it back to you all.
Great, thank you.
I guess piggybacking on that, does this all come to us as a recommendation that we then pass on to City Council, or is this body of work what ends up getting passed on to City Council?
So the intent is the comp plan advisory group gives you their input. You guys are the ones that gather and refine or review that information that's passed forward to you, refine that information, and at the end of this process, you will be forwarding your recommendation to City Council. And then City Council will have their own series of review as we move forward, and public hearings to actually adopt the plan. The plan needs to be adopted by the end of this year. Because it is a budget year, we're hoping that we can maybe not have a collision course with both of those at the same time. So our plan is to try to get this adopted by October, if possible, with a little leeway for them to be able to then focus on budget more clearly in November and December. But saying that, we'll just have to see how it goes, because it's a lot of work either way for all of this to take place. You know, there's just a lot of work. And as you see, as you've heard, there's a lot of new legislation where we have to refine the work that we're doing to address certain things that we haven't had to address previously in the comp plan. So you guys will be seeing all of this, refining that input from the comp plan advisory group, and coming up with your own recommendation.
Anyone else? Any questions for staff or our consultants? I'll double check with our online commissioner. Any questions or comments for staff or the consultant?
No, other than I would like to see that slide again that they were mentioning needing to retitle at some point.
Did staff catch that? I'm getting head shaking no. Can you say that again, Commissioner Betcher?
1 second. Let me see if I can address this. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay,
Whatever
good.
you're doing, do that.
Yeah, great. So I think, this was a little bit shocking to me when I saw we had a surplus capacity of zoned land for the 0 to 80% AMI, which is sort of, again, like it's a little bit opposite the narrative I've typically been hearing of our region, where we sort of need more capacity overall. And I was curious if they had some additional comments on how this slide might be retitled, and if there were any other sort of implications beyond there, that they might want to address here.
Yeah, so I would say, and so I tried to address it when we brought this up, because I know especially the title here is maybe a little misleading. So this breakdown, right, of the 3 income brackets is sort of by the by the way that housing types are defined within the Commerce guidance on how to assess housing needs by income, based on these sort of new legislative requirements. What it doesn't do is capture the nuance. For one, within 0 to 80%, there's obviously a lot of difference. Most of this this zoned capacity, I should say, based on recent development trends, we would know is closer to that 80% area median income. And in fact, some of it would more than likely be within the 80 to 120% AMI, just in terms of the rents that would actually be charged within those buildings. So I do sort of understand what you're saying, and it can be a little alarming or misleading, and which is why I sort of try to get out ahead of that to say that what this isn't saying is that, oh, the city has plenty of space for affordable multifamily housing, and they don't have to worry about that. Especially when we look at the actual production of housing, particularly within that 0 to 50% and even 50 to 80% area median income, we'll see that there hasn't been enough of that housing produced over the last number of years to expect that to meet the target going forward. You are technically zoned to build subsidized affordable multifamily housing within your existing zoning, mostly within the town center. Does that mean it's going to actually get built? Not necessarily. And so that's why there's still a need to consider strategies around that, and how can the city further promote as far from what the city can do to try and actually produce more of that housing.
Thanks. And can I assume that that will be part of our work going forward as well?
Yes, absolutely. So that's aside from sort of looking how to increase the overall land capacity, that's sort of when we talk about taking the feedback from the CPAG, from you all going forward, refining potential growth alternatives. A big part of that is going to be looking at, okay, what can the city do to actually increase overall capacity within all of these income bands, but also looking at strategies, particularly around affordable housing and just in general production, where it is assumed there's going to be a production deficit. What steps can the city take, both within its zoning code and development regulations, but other strategies potentially as well that can be put into this comp plan update.
Great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Nope. And yeah, don't worry. Definitely Planning Commission will have their opportunity to put in their input and, craft this comp plan. I did like some of the primers that the consultants did provide to the CPAG. So I know a lot of times when Planning Commission usually puts their 2 cents in, sometimes it's kind of like an after the fact exercise. And, I think in this case, especially with a lot of newer planning commissioners, having some of those resources and opportunity, to see that primer map, before, to help kind of prime that pump for the discussion, I think would definitely be beneficial when it does come time for us to talk about that. And I know, a lot of times in the past that we really haven't had that opportunity. So I know the timeline is tight, but if we could squeeze that into one of our busy meetings, that would be nice. I know it'd be a little trickier since our meetings are recorded and on the record, so it's a little harder to kind of have some of those exercises. But I'm sure we can figure out something, because I really liked how you guys sort of had that conceptual map first, and then the groups kind of split up and had some robust discussions. So I appreciate that. I'm seeing a lot of new things with technology these days, how versus 15, 20 years ago, how these type of meetings were run. So it's a lot of positive changes. So I'm just like to see that, and then some when it comes time for us to do it. So.
I think we're hoping with kind of changing our review process to hearing examiner, and this was part of the intent moving forward, is that we would have more time for the Planning Commission to do planning, because we need to get through, not that we need, but that we're updating the comp plan, major update, and so we need adequate time to do that. And then also that means that we have work on our development regulations. So there's a couple of busy years ahead for the Planning Commission to have time to take a look at all those things. And you guys are the group that should be the ones that are doing the bulk of that review. The Comp Plan Advisory Group is a help to that and is supposed to be where we're trying to be very inclusive in who we're reaching out to the community for input. But you guys are the recommendatory body to the city council. And so, you know, real work needs to be done at the Planning Commission level.
I know one of the other discussions that we've kind of had in the past, when we've been talking about especially tackling our different sub-areas, is the sub-area size and the need to maybe split some of these sub-areas up into smaller units. Right now, the sub-areas, you know, they're just kind of more of an overall administrative thing, and, you know, we can, you know, obviously Town Center has a little carve-out, and different areas have different carve-outs, but being that that's one of our goals and intentions, but we're not handling every single sub-area as part of this comp plan. Just the notion that the sub-area currently known as Cascade View may get split up. Not sure as much with Melody Hill. There's two distinct elements to Melody Hill. There's the light industrial component, and then there's the, you know, kind of the 220th component versus just the pure residential. But knowing that we have two sub-areas as part of this comp plan update, at least for one of those, there's probably going to be a serious discussion about changing the size of that sub-area and splitting it into two. Does that throw you guys off a little bit on that concept, or is that something that can be easily integrated into this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, you're always trying to build a better machine, right? And so what may have worked previously for these larger sub-areas doesn't necessarily work now. So, you know, we're taking a look at it as a whole as part of this, but that doesn't mean that our recommendation doesn't further divide some of those areas down, and that we take a look again at those neighborhoods in those sub areas moving forward. So I don't think anything's off the table.
Cool, great. All right, just one last check. Anybody have any questions or comments? I'm sure we'll have more as we progress, but for tonight's purposes, not hearing or seeing any. Just one last check with our online commissioner.
No questions.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So,
thank you all for your time.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to where are we at here? Item number 7, review amendments to MTMC Chapter 15.10 regarding the fire code official.
Hello, Commissioners, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Matthew Gisso. I'm the building official here at this wonderful city. Some of you that have been here for a little while might think that you have deja vu, and you do. This was a code change that we proposed earlier this year with the adoption of the 2021 codes that Washington State keeps moving out. So we thought it would be fortuitous of us to go ahead and just get these adopted so that way we could best serve our citizens. And as the commissioners propose to support this, to bring some of the power our code back to City of Mountlake Terrace and not to outside entities. So one of the biggest thing is there was a lot of code language that's no longer consistent with fire code and wasn't in 2018 and won't be in the 2021 codes, and that's the reference to fire marshal everywhere. The International Fire Code refers to them as the fire code official that makes those decisions. So we've made those changes in our code to be consistent with the International Fire Code. One of the other changes was the city engineer position was named something previously in the past. We have adjusted that to actually just say city engineer as that position is currently filled. And then there was provisions in the code that allowed the fire marshal or the fire code official to just change the code when they wanted to. We don't think that's right for people who are looking at try and build in Mountlake Terrace. We want our code to be consistent, and we are a minimum code compliant municipality. There is very strict criteria already built into the International Fire Code that allows adjustments and changes to the code, and we think that's sufficient. We don't need to have anything extra in our code for changing those provisions. Any questions?
Planning Commission have any questions, comments? Online?
I just, before Commissioner Betcher speaks, I would just like to add, like Matthew said, we recently adopted the 2018 updates earlier this year. The state tends to run behind, and there was COVID and all those good things. We were supposed to be ready to adopt the 2021 International Building Code and International Fire Code provisions. There's been some appeals and case law that have kind of stymied that process somewhat, but there are some things, like Matthew said, that we feel like it's in the best interest of the city to move forward at this time, what we're presenting now, with the realization that we're going to have to come back to you, well, potentially later this year to do the rest of the updates to the 2021 plan once that gets refined or potential changes from the International Code Council. So just FYI, we're kind of moving this in steps as we go along on the stuff that we can be sure of as we move forward.
And Commissioner Betcher, did you have any questions or comments?
Oh, no.
Okay. I just had one quick question, and I don't know if fire code even deals with this or if it's purely a part of our building code. You know, we've had some very light and brief discussions lately about, you know, single stair and, you know, the opportunities of allowing single stair structures in the city, like, you know, how Seattle does in that presentation they had at the APA conference. Would the update to the fire code have to take that into consideration as well, or is that just completely building code?
Yeah, so this isn't the update to the fire code. That's gonna, it's currently March. That's gonna become updated. So we'll probably see you in February for that adoption of the 2021 code cycle. Mm-hmm. And we'll be able to go over the changes to the IBC, IRC, IMC, UPC, and the IFC, as well as the, I could go through more of them. But,
I thought you were going to say UFC for a second. I was like, isn't that the fight?
UFO, UFC, yeah.
Are you making fun of my codes?
No, I'm not at all.
Anyway, no, but planning and building work very closely together, and we are looking to do as best we can to make sure that our codes work together to help the city of Mountlake Terrace grow in the way that the commission and city council see that they want it to grow. So luckily we do work very close together as well as with engineering at adjusting our code to fit our municipality. So we will be looking at doing that as we adopt the 2021 code cycle. And if there's any amendments that Planning Commission is interested in that adoption, then we'll go over it at that time. Like I said, probably around February-ish.
Great, thank you. Just one last check. Anybody questions, comments? Sounds like we're going to be looking at this very soon again, so we may have more questions then. Great, thank you.
And so we're looking for a motion to.
Oh, you need a motion. Oh, I'm sorry. Good grief, okay. A little deficient on this agenda item with my stack of stuff here tonight, so. Specifically, what is it that you're looking for?
For support in the proposed changes to the municipal code to make it consistent with the current fire code.
Does that need to be a formal motion or just uninformal?
A formal motion.
Formal motion?
Yeah.
Okay. So would anybody like to make that motion, or I can say it and you can just say so moved? Or
Motion to approve amendments to Chapter 1510 regarding the fire code.
Is that good enough for staff? All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. I'll see you here pretty soon to go over other code amendments.
Thanks.
All right, then we got item number 8, review of proposed draft engineering development manual. We have saved the best for last.
All right. Hi, my name's Rich Meredith. I'm the city engineer. I'm bringing meeting number 4. It's been at least 6 months since I've been here before, but this is meeting number 4 in a series to take you through the process we've been going through to update our engineering and development standards. We have an acronym for our new document, the EDM. Same acronym that Shoreline uses. It's a coincidence. So anyway, let's see. Here's where we currently are. For those that may have forgotten because it's been so long. Design requirements, they're currently, we have design requirements in multiple places. We have them in our code, we have them in the comprehensive plans, we have them in policies, we have them in standard details. Trying to keep track of design standards and all these different documents is confusing. There are conflicting design standards. So in an effort to streamline the process to get all of our design standards in one place, which will make it easier to update them in the future, we have been consolidating all these different design standards into one manual. This also gives us the opportunity to elaborate and expand on some of the design criteria to make it a little bit easier for the user and the practitioner. Also, by taking design standards out of the code, we've made the process to initiate change to our standards a little bit easier without having to go through a long process. What we intend to do is update this design or this EDM at least once a year. This is a very detailed and comprehensive document, and there's a lot of areas that we will continue to work on. This first draft of it, the first edition of it, anything that was somewhat controversial, we've kind of just like put that on hold with the idea of addressing it in the next edition. As we go through the suggested revisions to the code, we find more and more issues that we think would be topics that would be better discussed at a later time, or we could talk about them through this process. But it's an involved process. It's a necessary process because, as we've heard before and other times tonight, there's a lot of development coming to Mountlake Terrace. And if we don't have clear and concise standards, then we're not going to be in control of how these developments play out on our streets and how our streets get designed. So there's some urgency on our part to try to make sure that we can resolve a lot of the inconsistencies and the gaps in our design standards. And that's what we're hoping to address with our EDM here. So this kind of sums up what we're doing is we're creating our EDM. The new EDM is also going to have our details and specifications in the appendix. One of the appendices is also going to have what we're calling the street matrix. So instead of having a typical section that could be loosely interpreted on any street in the city, we're going to have a street-by-street listing of where how wide the street is going to be curb to curb, how wide the sidewalks, the amenity zone, have some type of a plan where we've looked at every roadway on a case-by-case basis. Trying to have a generic cross-section leaves a lot of ambiguity and flexibility out there to interpret it in a different way. And I think it's going to be a lot more easier and efficient for staff and developers to, try to build their plans correctly the first time instead of having to constantly meet back and forth, trying to resolve differences of interpretations. We hope this will streamline our design review process, because that's a major goal for us, to try to be more efficient and do more with less. So here is the current tentative schedule. Tonight, December 11th, I wanted to present kind of the entire document again and our suggested code revisions. We're planning on coming back on January 8th for public comment. And then if after the public comment, the decision is to forward this to the City Council, we're tentatively scheduled on January 25th and February 1st to present our ordinance with the code changes and the EDM to the City Council for the study session, and then for public comment and approval after that. Obviously, the January 25th and February 1st are contingent on how we decide to move forward from here. So, but this is our current tentative schedule, kind of the best case scenario. So that's where we're at there. And so I think for what I wanted to do now, I don't know, we've gone through the entire document, the EDM, before. We've made a few revisions to it, but nothing significant, I think. The revisions are more tied to, as we've gone through the code revisions, here's some of the things that we needed to adjust to be consistent. So I thought I would spend the rest of our time going through some of the highlights of the code revisions and showcase some of the issues there that may spark some more discussion.
Just real quick before you proceed, looking at the timeline here, so I'm seeing the January 8th, you've got a public hearing, and we just continued our public hearing for another topic for the 8th as well.
Yep.
So I'm just want to make sure I'm seeing that correctly, so we're probably going to have 2 public hearings on the 8th.
Yeah, so we would have the continuation first, hopefully, because that's fairly limited in what we're going to review. And then, yeah, but it's not atypical that we could have 2 public hearings.
Oh, no, yeah, we've done it
Yeah,
before.
so.
Great, thank you.
Let's see here. All right, so this is Title 13. Title 13 is our public services. I'm going to see if I can zoom in on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to zoom in on that thing?
Yeah. I need Bluebeam. So some of the areas that we took out of the chapter 13 here. So the ones that are crossed out, these are sections that were in our code that talked about a lot of design considerations. These were all moved to the EDM so that we could have more of our design information in one place. Some of the materials for water pressure valves and for fire hydrant installation, they evolve after time, and it doesn't make sense to keep those in the code because the process to change some of those is more cumbersome. I'm not saying that we change those standards a lot, but we do change them from time to time. One of the changes that we proposed in Title 13 here is a lot of the code references referred to the city manager. We use the public works director instead of the city manager. A lot of these decisions really should be handled more at a director level instead of the city manager level. Now, the city manager can still designate the public works director, but for clarity purposes, we'll see something later on. Be consistent through some of the areas of the code. It was a lot of these decisions were being made at the director level and not the city manager. So we've gone through and made a number of edits, just changing the city manager to public works director here in Title 13. This section here, 1305, just is more information that got moved to the EDM. And I'm not going to go through all these. I'm going to try and find some highlights of some other issues. I want to highlight some of these. These are another theme that we were going through and trying to eliminate in the code. And these are the fees. Anywhere we saw a fee that was in the code, we're suggesting that we want to move all these to a fee schedule instead of keeping all the different fees buried throughout the code. This makes it really difficult and awkward to update again, and you can end up with conflicting fees in different places. When if we move all the fees to a fee schedule, then it's a lot easier to see in one place what all the fees are when we want to make changes to them. It's part of the theme that as we go through here, that's one of the items we're trying to clear out of the code and move it all into one place. Same thing with some of the fines and the violations. I'm I'm not sure if this is the time to go and change some of the fines, but it is something that we wanted to highlight, that if we wanted to take the fees and the cost and the violation amounts out of the code and move them into a different schedule, this would be an opportunity to do that.
Would you be looking for direction from us on that? Like a thumbs up, do it, move it, or?
Yes, yes. If and we could stop and kind of address that. If that's a direction that you would support, then we could do a thumbs up on that.
I'm seeing some thumbs up. I know for me, it makes sense just to have it on a fee schedule, especially because it's buried. It sometimes get lost. The next thing you know, it's 15 years later, and the fee hasn't really appreciated with the cost of everything else, and it's like a drop in the bucket, and violators just scoff at that, and
That's exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I noticed the copy that I have, it's not a marked up copy, so a lot of the strikeouts that you're presenting here are already off of the version that I have, but I do have a lot of highlighted sections. Would you say most of the highlighted sections kind of go back to the one you just showed, where it's like a fee or monetary value that is called out specifically in here, that we just said, hey, yeah, just move it to a fee schedule?
Yeah, it's a fee or a monetary value in the highlights, and then the crossouts are a lot of the design standards and criteria that we move to the EDM. I can make available to everybody the track changes version. That might be easier to see. I noticed that when it got printed up to PDF, I think a lot of the changes, or the crossouts didn't come through when you did that. So we can supplement both versions. You should have both versions.
Yeah, normally that's what we'll get, is that type.
All right.
We also made so many changes that at a certain point, to look at something that, is this thick, that becomes this thick, because you've basically just moved so many things and altered it. It might be easier to get the clean version of the proposed EDM, and then Rich can supply some of these code sections that have the track changes of where, for writing an ordinance, you can see specifically like what's going to get moved and what's not going to move. Maybe that's more helpful to have you guys all review the actual documents themselves.
I'm going to jump ahead to the transportation code. Okay. Part of the reason I wanted to jump to this one, we are, oh, this isn't, hold on a sec. I want to get the one with crossouts in it. There we go. So what we did a lot through this section and some of the other sections, there's references to an engineering services director. We don't really have that category anymore. So we've replaced the engineering services director with the city engineer, which is me. I empowered myself. And then to enable the EDM to be authorized through the code, what we did in the transportation section here is this is where we're referring to the engineering development manual as, an authorized document and the standard that we would follow. So we took out some of these other reference manuals because they've been moved into the engineering development manual, and then we just referred to the engineering development manual as the standard that we're going to follow. So I think this is going to be able to address where we refer to that as something that's required by code. There's a couple other sections throughout the code where I've changed the references to be the EDM, but this is the main one. We're still keeping a lot of the comp plan, the comprehensive plans as referenced in the code, but anything that was related to an engineering standard, the details and specifications, those are all moved into the EDM. There's also a number of definitions in the transportation, and we're revising some of these definitions so they're consistent. They'll be consistent with what we see in the EDM and state law. Crosswalk definition is an example where you can see we've crossed out the old definition, and I literally copied the language in the RCW there because I didn't want to try to rewrite the definition of a crosswalk. Here's still a reference to the engineering services director. We'll probably end up crossing that out, but this is the reference that's in the code right now. Let's see. Another definition that was a little ambiguous was a landscape buffer. We've had a few meetings internally about what that's supposed to mean. Some people considered it what some people call the planning strip. Sometimes it's considered the area between a development and the frontage. We kind of settled that the best way to describe the planting strip is more of an amenity zone, because the planting strip area is where you're going to find the different amenities, the poles, trees, benches, any kind of amenity. Sometimes you'll get junction boxes, things you don't want to put in the sidewalk area. So instead of calling that a planting strip, which kind of limits what you think is going to be there, if you call it an amenity zone, it's more inclusive. So we're going to go through all of our references to planting strips and update them to be, or proposing to update them to amenity zone. And then that takes the landscape buffer, which is a useful function, and we tried to modify the definition of that to mean that that buffer area between frontage and a development. Another definition that we wanted to add into here is micro-mobility devices. The code up till now is pretty silent on anything but peds and bikes and cars and trucks. But we know that these micro-mobility devices, which are the small little electric-powered scooters and electric wheelchairs, things like that, we need to be able to define what those are and make sure that our code isn't excluding the use of them on some of our places, or if we don't want them to be there, then we should exclude it, but we need to define it in order to manage that. For example, the multi-use path definition here, it specifically says it's exclusively for non-motorized use and available for non-motorized travel, including but not limited to pedestrians and bicyclists. Now we know that electric scooters are going to use a multi-use path. We know that a person in a wheelchair or an electric wheelchair, they'll be using a multi-use path. So we need to make sure that our definitions are kind of more inclusive, and so we're trying to just update the definitions to be to reflect that. I'm going to jump ahead to 30. This one. Here's another area where we're going to probably review this more or discuss this more. But this is another example where we want to get rid of a dollar factor, a dollar value, and maybe go to something that's more adjustable. So I'm just suggesting here that instead of the $75,000, we go to like 50% of assessed value or whatever the, the appropriate number is there. But relating the value to an assessed value versus trying to put a fixed number in there, I think is going to make our code more resilient and not have to be updated constantly. And then here's another issue that we can discuss is like what would be the appropriate period of time for that evaluation. Is it 5 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 3 years? It could be, any value there. Let's see. Another inconsistency that we found across our standards and plans is the minimum width of a sidewalk. Right now, we're trying to change all the references so that we're consistently asking for a minimum of a 6-foot sidewalk. I think that there's places where it says 6 right now. There's places where it says 5. A 6-foot sidewalk is going to be more conducive to walkable cities and accommodating, all users. And so our recommendation is going to be to stick with the 6-foot figure or more. This would be more of a minimum width.
Kind of circling back on that, since we were just talking about landscape buffer, is there anywhere in the code where it designates the minimum width of a landscape buffer when there is one?
For the amenity zone or the landscape buffer?
Well, I guess, I kind of have questions both, but specifically for the landscape buffer, it kind of goes back to, our recent discussions on street trees and, a more healthy environment for street trees to thrive, and obviously the wider the,
So that's one of the changes where we're calling that an amenity zone versus a landscape buffer that's on a site, but that would be part of the street sections that would be a requirement. So typically right now it's a 5-foot planting area for that amenity zone. Mm-hmm. But I know that there's been conversations of between 4 and 5 feet. I think that also depends on, are you planting landscaping along the full frontage? Are you doing tree wells? Kind of what that looks like. But those are called out currently in our street sections.
Okay.
For what those widths are.
We've also got details, and we're going to modify them if they don't show it, but you can put a street tree in a narrower amenity zone if you use like structured soils and such underneath so that the tree roots can grow, have space underneath the sidewalk to grow, but with root barriers so they don't uproot the sidewalk. I've seen a number of jurisdictions that have some successful details that use the amended soils and the structural soils underneath the sidewalk to help make the tree healthy and viable without destroying the sidewalk in a few years. So we'll be adopting some details like that. I'm going to go to we're putting a new section in the EDM on lighting. I know there was some discussion earlier tonight about lighting, and we wanted to make sure that our lighting standards were easy to find. I think right now we just reference the national standard, and that doesn't really say anything. You have to go find that national standard. Sometimes they're behind a paywall. So we want to make sure that our standards are easily accessible and not hidden behind any paywalls or anything, and clear so that everybody knows exactly what we're looking for. So we're updating our lighting values and where we would put them. We've also moved some of these shared driveways and private access. There's a lot of confusion about how this would all be implemented. More information that's been moved to the EDM and clarified a bit more. There's also, the width of driveways has varied depending on where you're looking in the code. So this is another example of why we're trying to put it all in one place instead of have it scattered in different places. All right. Now I'm going to switch to another one and start messing with Christie's town center code. I'm just going to offer a couple suggestions.
We've got plenty too, so.
Stop share. This one. Is that the right one? No, this one. Okay, this is section 1950, the town center zones. I wanted to highlight an issue that has come up a few times. Here's what we were just talking about, the driveway standards. It's in another part of the code. These are different numbers than what in the transportation code. Makes it really confusing. So we've all kind of collaborated to come up with what the value should be and put that into EDM. So we'll take it out of here. This figure, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with it, but this is the figure that we use for town center. And one of the issues we've had with this figure is the actual Main Street. The Main Street primary streets, it says as designated. It's unclear where the designated lies. Is that the city engineer's decision? Is it Christie's decision? I mean, it's not really clearly spelled out. And since it's within the town center, it's still going to be subject to some of the design standards and the goals of how we want our town center to look. So we're going to propose to replace these yellow lines with some actual cross sections. So it would either be a yellow with get rid of the as designated and give it its own cross section like this. My goal is to actually address it in the street matrix that defines what the curb to curb width will be, and then the beyond the curbs it would follow what it says in these details here. And as we develop a street matrix, which we've done one for the town center, which shows up in the EDM draft, it's going to mean that we're really going to focus on where the curbs are and not so much on what the lane assignments are or what the parking type is, or what the dimensions are. Striping can change at any time, so it shouldn't really be in the code that this is what it shall be. But what is important is how wide is your sidewalk in your amenity zone, and how wide is your face a curb to face a curb, so that you know how much room you have to deal with in the road. So we'll make some updates to these figures, and if it doesn't happen with this revision, it'll happen with the next one, because these do need to be talked about. These are the town center streets, which defines what the face a curb to the building should be, but it's going to definitely vary from curb to curb width, depending on whether it's a storefront or whether it's a landscape frontage, if we have a center turn lane, if we have bike lanes out there. I mean, the side details fit everything, but the street to street is conflicting with each other. So that's why we're proposing to update these.
And I would add, we did spend a lot of time talking about lane configuration, especially on the proposed 57th.
Well,
So I can appreciate simplifying the cross-section and not being so focused on how, how the lanes are striped, because, I can guarantee you through that whole process, there definitely wasn't consensus. We all kind of came to a happy medium, and I'm sure as things change, those configurations may change, and they may stay the same.
232nd out here is a perfect example. It should, if we followed this, it would be 36 feet curb to curb, with one lane each direction and parking on each side. 232nd is our traffic signal. We've got a two-way left turn lane, goes right by Diamond Knot and Double D. The two-way left turn lane, makes it operate very well for turning movements out there. The road itself right now is 40 feet wide, so would we narrow it up? Or would we try to take advantage of the, keep the two-way left turn lane on the approaches to the always stop at 58th and the signal at 56th? I think that makes more sense to keep the turn lane in there. And maybe put a bike lane on there, I'm not sure. But these are the things that don't fit into the mold that this cross-section gives us. But when you look at the practical operation of the roadway today, I think the two-way left turn lane makes a lot of sense out there. And when we build out 234th and when we build 57th, we're going to want these to be pedestrian-oriented crossings. So how do we build those? There's just a lot of thought, I think, if we look at it on a case-by-case basis versus a generic cross-section. I think we'll get a better product if we looked at them individually instead of, just try to make them generic. We were talking with some consultants, and we're trying to consider some type of a Wooner treatment on 57th, and the Wooner treatment doesn't really fit some of the pedestrian core streets. If we were actually doing this street with angle parking and a Wooner, if you wouldn't necessarily have two travel lanes, you might just have one shared lane and angle parking. Or you would have parallel parking in one shared lane and a lot of pedestrians crossing in the middle. I think that's been more of the consensus of how we would want a street like 57th to operate. And so it's a little bit different than what we see in the code. So these are all things that we're kind of reviewing in the background to see if it makes some sense to try to update some of our standards. Um, 1950. Sorry, I'm looking for one specific one here that caused us some issues. This one, on-street parking. So we've got in the code that right now, on-street parking must be counted towards on-site parking requirements. So what this does is that if there's on-street parking in front of a developer, they can use the on-street parking and reduce the number of parking spaces that they have on site. And if they reduce the number of parking that they have on site, then that in reality means that people will park more out onto the streets. And we know that as town center develops, that parking is going to be a premium, not only for people that want to park there all day, but the other fact that we're facing these days is there's actually a greater need for load zones than there was before, because we've got all the deliveries, the Amazons, the DoorDash. Everybody needs kind of a quick drop off and pickup area, and that usually ends up being out on the street. So if we allow developers to use on-street parking to count towards their required parking, and then we use that on-street parking for loading spaces, then we've ended up with a loss of parking overall. And In some cases, especially as we get closer to light rail, maybe that makes more sense, but in our code, we're going to make the recommendation that we stop allowing the use of on-street parking towards the parking requirements and deal with the parking requirements that we have for on-site. I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
I'd just say, from my day job, I see that. It is a competition, especially when you get applications that come in and they want to do something, even if it's temporary, and you have to tell them, well, you see that sign on the Google Street View and that painted curb? That means that business requested that parking to be that way, and they're not going to be too fond of you placing your dumpster there or your storage container.
Dumpsters, that's another issue. That's something else we have to tighten up in our standards is the dumpsters and the trash pickup. A lot of the fee simple developments want to put all their garbage cans out on the amenity zone.
Let me tell you about the standard comment I have with every one of those things that come before us, and that has been a big concern when, you used to have maybe 2 to 4 houses. Total dumpsters on any given week would have been 8 over the course of that space, and then all of a sudden now you have 16 townhomes trying to put 16 dumpsters or, garbage cans out in the same curb space area. And I'll just say that some developers actually come up with some good plans for that. Others choose not to.
The dumpsters out there are right in your sight triangle, so that they can become a safety hazard. They're definitely a concern. I needed to touch on some of the this is another issue that has been coming up recently, and we wanted to strengthen our code when it comes to off-site parking spaces, like in a parking garage, to actually tell the designers that a parking space cannot include any part of a column. A lot of them are taking a 2-foot wide column and then drawing a parking space down the middle of it and saying that they have a full-size space, even though you really have 1 foot of a column encroaching on your parking space, plus whatever shy distance a person's going to stay away from a column. So you're really not getting a full-size parking space next to a column. And so even though we have language in the code right now that says you can't have any obstructions in a parking space, and a column, in my opinion, is an obstruction, there isn't anything about any type of a shy distance. But if it's a planter, a raised planter, then you have to leave 18 inches clear. So we see that as a bit of a conflict, and we wanted to be able to clarify it. So some of the language that we've proposed here is, instead of just saying planter island, we've also added in wall or column, so that we make it clear that the intent as a parking space has to be something that's usable. While our current code says 18 inches, 1.5 feet, I think in the interest of compromising to something that's a little more usable, we could go down to 12 inches on something like that. I've seen other jurisdictions that actually say that if the column is at the front of the parking stall, as long as you don't have any obstructions in the middle of the parking stall, you can still open your door. That would be more acceptable. But right now, we don't have any language like that. Ours merely says you can't have an obstruction, which means you can measure your parking stall up against a column. And if you're trying to put in a compact space and you don't have any shy distance, it becomes less of a usable space, maybe by motorcycles or something like that. But that's not the intent of our compact and our standard car requirements.
That was actually going to be my question, because I was thinking about, it's like, well, those narrow stalls, a motorcycle still could use it.
Yep.
So, saying, hey, No, if you still need, it can be a motorcycle stall, but don't try and count it as a vehicle stall. And does our code call out the difference, or is it just parking stalls in general and it doesn't differentiate between a full-size vehicle stall versus a compact vehicle stall versus a motorcycle stall?
We differentiate between compact and full-size, and the difference is a compact is a half a foot less than a full-size, and it's 2 feet shorter, I believe. Those are the two distinctions. We don't have any language about a motorcycle stall or any requirement for it.
So we could say, hey, I mean, you're not required to make it a motorcycle stall. You're not required to have the motorcycle stalls. You have a space where a car isn't really going to be optimal there. We can encourage you to put a stall there. You can make it a motorcycle stall. We're not prohibiting that. That's fine. We're just not counting it as a vehicle.
And exactly. There are some of the developments that, like I said, have striped their stalls through a column, basically, but they still met the minimum number of required parking stalls. So there's not an issue from my standpoint of having the narrower stalls for bicycles or motorcycles and such. But if we have a minimum requirement for the number of full-size stalls, they have to be measured and usable as a full-size stall. There's also some language in here, and I don't know if I have it right in front of me, about tandem parking. So tandem parking is going to be something I think we hear more and more of as the developments get a little denser. Tandem parking is basically one car behind is blocking in the car in front of them. So that's one way to squeeze in a few more parking spaces. I think the way our code is written right now is that there has to be, in order to approve that, there has to be an attendant on site with the keys to all the cars. Which isn't going to really be feasible in some of these large residential units. But if we modified the language to say, or to consider that if they both belong to the same unit, both stalls, then technically the attendant is, whoever's in the apartment there, and they'll have keys to both their cars. So I think just clarifying the language to meet more of that intent would help make sure that if somebody wanted to try to use the tandem parking option, that they could, with those caveats on it. Another area that we're silent on right now is stacked parking. I know in Redmond they're getting developments where they're stacking the cars on top of each other with hydraulic lifts, and so just thinking ahead, and we don't have to put it into this one, but at some point in the future, we're probably going to have to address, would we allow that and what kind of criteria we would follow to do that.
I know I've seen that example for years, like in New York, obviously in Manhattan, where people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a stall. And, you see this tiny little parking lot in between two buildings, and they've got that stacked option. But it sounds like what you're saying is in Redmond now, they're seeing it like in their structured parking for their...
Yes.
Wow.
There's some of that in Seattle as well. I mean, you see it more in New York and like Manhattan, but yeah, I've parked where I've gotten stacked before in Seattle.
I know car elevators are a thing now too, so it's they'll pack them in any way possible. I'm just kind of curious, have we received in any of our general inquiries on building, has the city gotten any questions related to either the tandem or the stacked parking as part of a development?
I've seen the tandem. I think that the last submittal we got from Millstream, the Candela development, they showed tandem parking in there.
Really?
We've also had inquiries about flex cars and, with the cost of providing parking space, people are looking for alternatives. And like Rich said, I think we'll see more and more of that in these higher, density developments as we move forward.
Here's another topic that it would be useful to have some feedback on is the coverage, the impervious surface coverage in a front yard. Right now, our code says that people can pave their front yards up to 50%. I personally think that I think our intent for our front yards is, one, I want to reduce impervious surface as much as possible from a water quality standpoint. And two, I think that, in my opinion, people should be parking if they have a garage or a carport or around the side of the house, but they shouldn't be parking all across the front of their house, which there are people doing that. And I've seen some recent permits where they're trying to do something like that. It just seems like this is an opportunity for us to decide what our vision for the city should be, and do we want people to pave and park in their front yards, or should we try to keep a higher percentage of pervious surface in those?
I know, me personally, I think that 50% is too high. Definitely needs to be a smaller amount. What that smaller amount should be, I don't know if I can give you that number tonight. I think about, what are our average widths of lot sizes right now versus what they're going to be in the future. I know as areas get more dense, on-street parking is going to be non-existent. It's going to be like it is in, Seattle neighborhoods. So the ability for these developments to at least have some place to be able to park their vehicles off-site is better. Obviously, in a perfect world, nobody would have a vehicle at all and everybody would walk and bike and be very sustainable, but, that's not reality. But I think, and I'm sure staff could probably just do this, look at what they're projecting. Hey, what's a developable lot size? What is the standard configuration that we're going to see? And what's the, kind of the minimum that percentage-wise they would need to put a driveway on there, and have that number be exactly that or just a hair above that. And yeah, definitely not where they can park like 5 vehicles across there. Because I'm thinking of specific properties in my mind right now that I drive by and I'm like, did they just pave that themselves, or did the city actually approve that at one point? Because it seems like their entire front yard is. Now, granted, I'm sure their front yard used to be bigger 40, 50 years ago. Maybe the road got widened a bit, and so their front yard isn't as big now, but yet the entire front yard, there's vehicles. It's all paved, so I definitely think that number needs to be reduced. Obviously, staff's best judgment on, what that number would be. I'm sure we would be fine unless somebody has got it in their mind right now. No, it needs to exactly be 33.57% and not over, but definitely lower. Definitely lower.
But the only thing I find confusing is it says front yard, and it's not referring to the whole yard or just the front yard, and that's kind of
It's a good
probably
point.
up for
Because
interpretation.
normally we think of you're probably driving, you're at because we don't have alleys except for one block in the city. So if you're driving a vehicle and you're parking it, you're going to be driving from the front yard. But I have somebody on my street who has literally paved. Not only have they widened their driveway twice as long as I can remember, but now that paving goes all the way into their backyard as well, and God knows how much of their backyard they paved. And so that's a very good point. And if we're thinking about pervious versus impervious surfaces, we shouldn't just be looking at the front yard. We should be looking at the backyard as well.
We should have a percentage of impervious surface for the whole site, and then figure out how we would want to address the front yard. I mean, we have some places with 0 lot lines. Maybe we don't look at the percentage on the front yard, but we look at how many vehicles they can park there, or we have some type of measure that's related to the width of the lot. We haven't really solved this one yet, so that's why I thought I'd just throw it out there as something to think about. We may not make any changes to that this time around, but it's something I think we should be addressing. Another issue that I think we talked about it a little bit ago is loading spaces. An example of, loading spaces, especially the off-site loading spaces, we don't really have, I think, a good handle on how many loading spaces that we need. One development that we were looking at had, I think, 300 or 400 units and one loading space. And, they're arguing that, well, they can schedule times for people to use the loading space, but, and they can, move in and move out on different days of the month, but one loading space does not seem to pass the test that this is going to be a reasonable amount of space, which means that they're going to need on-street loading spaces in order to handle the times when people are moving in and out all at the same time. And so this is an area where to be a little more proactive and maybe decide how many loading spaces should be on-site, including garbage. And then it kind of ties into, do we want them to have spaces for deliveries? Should we have those on-site in addition to out front? It's like sometimes you can never have enough space for that. If we have ground floor commercial, which we want on a lot of these buildings, sometimes these businesses want some short-term turnover parking for people to, pull up, grab a coffee, and then leave again. And so they don't want the parking spaces all filled up with long-term parkers or even some loading activities. There's a lot of uses for on-street space, and I'd rather not have that all dictated by loading spaces. So again, if we accommodate them on-site, I think we can meet some of the needs that we know are going to crop up.
That's the same issue that Seattle deals with right now. One of the things SDOT did was create, kind of like a vehicle or like a food pickup zone. Restaurants can say, hey, I'd like to have, I have like 5 on-street parking spaces in front of the building the space I'm leasing. And, they usually want to turn one of those into, short-term, like 5 minutes or less and specifically reserve, hey, this is for somebody who's parking to run in, get their food and go. It's great for the business. Frustrating for me when I'm looking for a place to park because I want to go in and eat. But a lot of those places ended up getting converted to curb space cafes when COVID hit. And they've decided just to keep it at that. But it's this competition between the uses for the on-street parking. But I'll agree, that one of the big issues that we have right now is that the new thing is storage containers for, moving. Instead of a moving truck. And all these apartments aren't providing a place for storage containers. And you can't stick them in the alley in Seattle. Seattle doesn't allow storage containers in the alley, so you have to put it on the street. Maybe we need to start encouraging some of these buildings to provide some sort of on-premises area to be able to deliver those containers to. Because when it's on the street, then you're competing against customers for those ground floor businesses, or people who need just to use the load, unload real quick, or again, the competing of for the delivery space. A lot of deliveries you see in Seattle, they just park their truck right in the middle of the road because they can't get up to the curb, and they don't care. They're just blocking the turn lane. They're crossing their fingers that they're not going to get cited. While they're making their deliveries, because not every business can have their delivery be made, overnight or, in non-peak times. So
We're back to the two-way left turn lane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, that's a big one to tackle. It's,
let's see. I think that's kind of sums up a lot of it for tonight, and it's getting late. So do you guys have any questions for me?
Anybody have any questions? Not hearing or seeing anything? Our online commissioner, Adam, you got any questions?
I'll probably have some comments, but I'll save them till the 8th.
Sounds good.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because we've heard from members of the public in the past about bike lanes specifically, and I know from what you presented tonight, this seems like a lot of like organization and standardization and clarification into the EDM, and so maybe this isn't even relevant here, but we've had members of the public come in and talk to us about the design of bike lanes, in particular that being right next to a parking lane and fear of those car doors opening into them. And so I'm wondering, just because we're also talking about the street sections and maybe, refining those a little bit, if that's been considered at all in this process.
We haven't talked about it too much. When it comes to the bikes and the bikes design, we're going through with the comp plan update of the transportation master plan. We're definitely going to update the bike routes and the bike maps and the bike designs. Our new traffic engineer from Seattle has got extensive experience with the bike design. I've got extensive experience with it. You're exactly right. The space between next to parked cars is always a concern. The ideal bike lane these days is not the 5 feet up against a curb. It's usually 6 feet with a 2 or 3 foot buffer. What you run into is the amount of street space that you have from curb to curb. So there's always that balance. But I think that between our city traffic engineer and myself and some of the other excellent staff that we brought on in the last year, they're all bike advocates. We're taking a close, hard look at all of our bike facilities and our bike standards, and wherever we're seeing deficiencies, those are going to be on our list to start improving. And we'll have some of that reflected in the standard details.
Awesome. It sounds like that'll be part of the comp plan process too, so we'll keep an eye out for it there.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I know I just had one quick question, and, kind of circling back to sort of the micro-mobility that we were talking about. And I know that it's been a struggle in Seattle to get these companies to be more diverse with where they put their micro-mobility. They want to locate themselves in the very nice posh neighborhoods and ignore everyone else. In Seattle's, as with some other cities, put their foot down and said, no, you will be equitable with the distribution. But we've definitely not seen it a lot in our suburban cities. But as light rail is going to open up very soon, it's possible that some of these companies may want to start doing business in this city. I guess the question is kind of twofold. One, has the city received any inquiries from any of these micro transit providers? And or two, especially with like the scooters and stuff, has the city considered, requiring like a docking station that would be like in sort of like the activity amenities zone versus allowing it to just be haphazard and freestanding and people could just leave them wherever they feel like it?
I haven't heard of any inquiries yet. I think you've nailed it, though. As soon as transit fires up, sometime next year, hopefully, I think that's going to generate some more demand. And what we're doing on our end is with our standards, we're trying to identify what kind of routes that they would be on. We're trying to make sure there's going to be connections to the transit station from town center specifically. We're looking at the Millstream Candela development, for example, and we're already letting them know that they're going to have to keep a pedestrian corridor through there, something that's covered so that, it protects people, but it keeps that open because we're anticipating that there could be developments on both sides of the street, and we want to make sure we have great access to our transit center from town center. We won't have the trail open for a few years yet, so we have to keep the sidewalks accessible and we have to keep them open. So routes for the scooters to take will be there. I think it's a good point that we should plan for them just like we do for bike parking, because I think it's just a matter of when before we start to see that. And if we don't get private companies in with them, I'm still seeing people who get their own scooters out there and are driving around. So I think it's something that we should keep in mind and add into our standards. But I think that the EDM is probably going to be the place for a lot of those standards. And then the TMP is going to be where we kind of identified the preferred routes.
And then I would add with that, since, we don't know if they'll ever come or not, but if it starts feeling like they are, I've never been a big fan of, walk shed projections. I think, not everybody is very healthy and able-bodied. But I feel that as, like you said, either people might own their own scooters or, if there's plenty available to rent, that might make that sort of walk shed or that sort of pedestrianized travel distance to the light rail, that moves that buffer out a little bit more. And that might be something to consider when, because I know with this comp plan update, we're talking about, it's like, I overheard questions like, why did they stop here at the zoning? Why didn't they think about going forward? And of course, I'm just sitting there thinking, it's because what the consultant said. I wanted it to go further, but with increasing the options to people move from one place to another, that, the scooter shortens the distance for them. And so, if you're going to have more people with that as an option as well, then you probably are going to realistically be able to say, hey, we could probably push that a few more blocks out. People who are healthy, they're going to walk. People are going to bike, but, with all these other new technologies and microtransit available to people, that, that might further increase that, a population segment who can take advantage of that. So I know that's more of a land use issue, but it's everything's interconnected. So. Has anybody else got any questions, comments? Oh, Commissioner Betcher.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I did want to save other comments or questions until the 8th, but I did have one here. You mentioned a while back removing the option that on-street parking requirements could count towards parking minimums in buildings as a recommendation. I know that for a while now in the town center plan, we've been talking about allowing, maybe some kind of shared parking arrangements or something as part of the development standard. Like that's been a recommendation, I think, for the last couple of town center plans. I was curious if, I could see it being, I could see this happening, or I could see this being a recommendation in some areas of the town, but then like in places with more managed parking, I was wondering if maybe we could make a reference to that. Just to kind of tie it into, I imagine we'll probably wind up having more managed parking in the future, like managed parking districts. But sort of looking at districts a little bit more holistically in terms of how much parking they can provide and where they are, rather than maybe just off-site.
Commissioner Betcher, we do allow for shared parking currently. Rich is trying to find it right now, but we do allow for that. For the on-street parking, it's been allowed previously and kind of on and off in different areas. What we find is when we have kind of strip commercial or we have adjacent commercial, those same parking spaces get counted for each development. So, they could be counted numerous times. And so you're not really providing for extra spaces. You're just kind of recounting the same thing. So that's the concern there for us, in addition to some of the other stuff Rich talked about, but he's trying to find where we currently allow for shared parking arrangements.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just curious how that all fits into there. Because as you mentioned, like if they're counting those same spots over and over again, that almost points to wanting kind of more of a holistically managed parking district or something, which is maybe beyond the scope of this document, but like the on-street parking being allowed would maybe fit into that overall.
So I pulled up the shared use of parking facilities, the 19.125.060. So we've actually got complex arrangement here for how much parking can be shared. It takes into account the different land uses. And then if you're going to share it, we've got a number of criteria that you need to follow to do it. So this is actually one of the areas we didn't have any suggested changes at this point because it actually did a pretty comprehensive job of laying out the shared parking. But if there's some more revisions that you'd like to see for this, I'd be happy to entertain them.
All right, thanks. I don't have any suggestions for that at this time, but yes, I was curious how that fit in with this, so glad to see it's being addressed.
And I would just say, maybe I'll save it for another night, but I can tell you the story why we have such detailed shared parking in our code now that didn't used to be there. So anyway, just one last check. Anybody have any questions, comments? Not hearing or seeing anything, so thank you very much.
Okay, I will see everybody on the 8th.
All right.
I hope.
All right, so we got item number 9, director's report.
I'll keep it brief. So tree ordinance is going to city council this Thursday for a work session, and then it'll go to public hearing on the 21st. Just as an update, voting for chair and vice chair for the planning commission as we move into the new year, so be thinking about that. We've put together an internal draft work program for each of our departments, and we'll be bringing that forth to Planning Commission coming up here shortly for your work program for 2024. That will be forwarded to the City Council as well. So we'll be bringing that to you. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we canceled the December 25th Planning Commission meeting. So I would anticipate nobody would show up, but just in case that we have the official notification. So with that, I wanted to say good morning, Adam. It's pretty cool that you joined us. You might have beat Rory's record with your attendance, because I think you're a little further away than he was. And thank everybody on the Planning Commission for all the work that you do, and it doesn't go unnoticed, and staff appreciates your dedication and your commitment volunteering for the Planning Commission. So, it's just a really important function, and you guys need to know that you're appreciated very much. So happy holidays as well. We won't see some of you again until the new year, so thanks.
Anybody have questions for the director? Not hearing or seeing any. I got just more of a quick comment, kind of circling back on one of our public hearings tonight. A lot of part of their presentation was, talking about stuff that they, do for the community, but just wanted to say, whether it ultimately gets approved or not approved, that doesn't stop them from still doing what they're doing. But one of those comments that they kept bringing up was the fact that they weren't able to refurbish some of their existing infrastructure. So maybe when staff comes back, in the next meeting, also be able to highlight how, if it were to fail, how they still could have their remodels, how things are allowed, when they're grandfathered in, I know we had this issue a couple of years ago with some stuff in the town center. It's like, it was like a percentage based, if I'm remembering correctly, as long as they stayed within a certain percentage of the assessed value within a certain time period. I can't remember if it was 3 or 5 years. I want to say 3, but don't quote me. Then they could do whatever they wanted to do. And so what was being presented tonight was, them saying, we can't do this at all. It's like, well, nothing's preventing you from doing it now. But they were, a narrative was being shaped. But so I just want to make sure that when we see this again, that some of those points that they brought up can be addressed as well. So.
Sure, we can talk about non-conforming structures and uses and what would be permitted if in fact there wasn't approval of the text amendment, just so you guys have that information.
Great, thank you. So item number 10, miscellaneous business by call of planning commissioners. Anybody have any miscellaneous business? Your mic's off.
January 22nd, I will be out of country, not able to attend.
All right. Do we want to just go ahead and do an excused absence right now for that? Anybody like to make a motion?
I make a motion that we excuse Commissioner Morgan from the January 22nd Planning Commission meeting.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Enjoy your out-of-country experience. Anybody else? Any miscellaneous business?
I also need to be excused from the January 22nd meeting.
Oh, just double checking. We don't have any public hearings scheduled for the Not yet. Okay.
I can't even
if I
tell
could
you
just
what's
latched
on
onto
the
that
January
motion.
Yeah.
22nd agenda right now. I mean, I know we have some items, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Technically, all we need is 4, but
Need 4.
things come up. So
yeah, okay.
All right. So it sounds like we need another motion. Somebody like to make a motion?
Stinson.
I make a motion that we excuse Commissioner Stinson from the January 22nd Planning Commission meeting.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Anybody else? No one else can request that day off. Just double checking, Adam, you got anything?
No.
Okay. All right, sounds good. With that, I'll go ahead and declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. 11 o'clock. People doubted me that meetings go this long. I told them it used to happen all the time. They didn't believe me. Here's your proof.
Thanks, everyone.